proposal, and I know that there's a lot of interest in this. Obviously, there's also an opportunity to testify at the end of the hearing, and I would suggest that if anyone has not signed up to do so, please do so with the sergeants. Also, I appreciate the fact that there so many of you here. There is a room across the hall with screens and with seats where you could sit comfortably and listen. You're welcome to stand at the moment. The sergeants aren't throwing you out for fire reasons or anything else. But if you would like a comfortable place across the hall to sit, you would be able to follow the proceedings very closely. I have a little bit of committee business, and then we'll launch right into the subject of the morning. I wanted to say that, as she walks in the door, I wanted to welcome Senator Christine Kehoe, who will be becoming a part of the committee, taking Mark Leno's place. And I'm very pleased about that. Senator Kehoe was a former San Diego City Council member, former chair of the Senate Local Government Committee. She's a really valuable addition. She's also chair of the Appropriations Committee, so we're really glad she's here. Welcome. We were going to have a hearing on SB 66, which is Senator Vargas's urgency bill. We will postpone that until next week, our next meeting of the committee, when all committee members will be able to attend, and we will adopt our committee rules, which we do at the beginning of each session at that point. We will have less than a full committee today. Senators Huff and Fuller and LaMalfa will most likely not be able to attend. The Republican senators are having a retreat at which they will be discussing certainly budget is foremost, and I believe meeting with the governor either this morning or this afternoon. So we miss them. They are a really fine members of this committee. Senator Lieu is gone for the week. Senators DeSaulnier, Hancock will be arriving shortly, and Senator Hernandez is here, so the three of us will get busy. This morning we're going to examine the governor's budget proposal and about redevelopment agencies, turn over the debt obligations to successor agencies, and redirect the property tax revenue that has been diverted, continues to be diverted, to the underlying schools, counties, and cities, the local government. So that's what's in front of us today, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I've asked Treasurer Bill Lockyer to come and introduce today's efforts. Bill has a good perspective. First of all, he's our state treasurer, and as such has been a strong voice for fiscal responsibility and restraint and balance. He was first elected in 2006 to this position and reelected in 2010, so he's had some experience here. But prior to that, he was Attorney General, and prior to that was in the state Senate. He comes from San Leandro.
Can't keep a job.
And has a great deal of historical perspective, as well as present and future concerns. While he was in the Senate, he was the chair of the Judiciary Committee. He was the Senate pro tem and was elected to the Assembly prior to that. So we have someone with a real span of knowledge about the institution, about how it works, and about the various changes that have happened from a fiscal and state local government perspective. So, Bill, I'm really glad to see you. Thank you for coming, Treasurer Lockyer, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair, and members, pleased that you're engaged in this important discussion. I just mentioned that I thought the staff analysis and the commentary from the legislative analysts were both very thorough and very constructive, and as a sort of dispassionate way to get people to think about these policy matters. I guess I'll be, if you'll forgive me, a little less dispassionate about the topic, just if nothing else, to provide some energetic counterpoint to folks on the other side of the debate. But let me, though, start with this general observation, because those of us in state government have had countless conversations with our friends and colleagues and former colleagues in local government that starts with, "You're stealing our money," and it goes on from there. And this dialogue and interactions have gone on for literally decades. I hope someday someone will do the very complicated but disciplined analysis to show all of the multiple shifts of funding that have occurred since 1978 to actually figure out what the net result might be of all of that fiscal change. It's not certainly as simple as saying anybody has stolen somebody else's money, and I tried a couple of times to get some PhD student somewhere to do this as a doctoral dissertation and create the template that then you could go and put the numbers in for your own community and see what the net outcome might be. But what I principally conclude for that's relevant today is that the way in which the issue gets framed of it's our money versus your money is incorrect and unproductive. And it ignores the fundamental fiscal realities of our state for the last 30 years or so. And of course, post Prop 13, the legislature created a pool of all the remainder property taxes to reallocate them to local agencies, and there have been numerous shifts and changes, of course, since that initial allocation. But we note that more than 70% of the state budget is transfers to local agencies, and so it really, I think, is more appropriate to say there is a shared pool of money. It's all of our money, and we need to figure out kind of the smart and best way to use what limited resources there are. There are others that are going to talk more specifically about the governor's plan and perhaps get into some of the details. I have a particular interest in affordable housing finance, since it's one of the responsibilities of my office as well as others at state and local government that I hope will figure out how needed resources will continue to support necessary housing programs. And it's just one of the still unresolved aspects of this discussion. But I don't think it's one that ought to stop the uncertainties, in fact, that it hasn't been yet entirely figured out, I don't think should stop the basic policy from being enacted. And I would say, with respect to the fundamental policy, the sooner the better. Governor Arnold, for 6+ years, told us he was going to blow up boxes. He got one. Solid Waste Management Board. Jerry Brown, in 6 weeks, is targeting 700. Hooray. I applaud the blowing up boxes for real idea, and would say that the governor's proposal is consistent with the tax allocation authority that's placed in the legislature by Prop 13, that he's not suggesting that somehow there's money that belongs to one entity that's getting taken. It's reallocating among various important segments of government. And rather than taking from, the plan doesn't rob local agencies. It provides billions of dollars of extra money to schools, cities, counties, and special districts. Money that used to go to them, but is now retained by redevelopment agencies. So it does provide long-term increased revenues to those entities, schools, cities, counties, and special districts, and let them spend the money as they see fit. If they want to spend their money on redevelopment or something, some form of economic development, that's good. They should be able to make that choice. Now, there's clearly a need for the state to develop a more effective and a more integrated strategy to help create jobs and compete with other states and so on, to some extent other countries in this global environment. And that's a task that I hope will get done in a serious way. There's probably not a day that goes by that I don't talk with businesses that are trying to calculate the economic benefits and incentives that they may receive from expanding their solar manufacturing in California rather than taking it to Oregon, where there's a couple of special tax breaks, or to Malaysia or whatever. So those are things we need to think through, and unfortunately there's not much of an integrated strategy of that respect. In that respect, everybody defends their sort of independent strand of effort that goes on. The independent research, as you've indicated, and the AOL comments on, raises very legitimate questions about whether there's a net statewide economic benefit to California as a consequence of redevelopment, or whether it just moves things around. So it's kind of three-card Monte game. I think it's a fair question to ask how it serves the state to have local property tax revenues that are allocated by the state used to incentivize interregional competition. So how is it particularly responsible to have a strategy that results in Victorville luring a manufacturing plant from Visalia, or Pomona convincing a Target store to locate there instead of West Covina? And most of the literature, despite the anecdotes we hear from occasional successes, and they certainly do exist, but most of the serious academic literature that's non-advocacy nature suggests that there's modest benefits from these spendings, and very expensive spending, I might add, based on their reports per job created. So there are efficiency issues that are good ones to talk about. When you have one local government through a redevelopment agency making spending decisions that unilaterally shift money away from other local governments. Economists would talk about that as a method whereby some local government agencies externalize a portion of their costs and activities. It may well be the more appropriate metaphor in this setting is to call them vampire agencies, because basically they're the vampires sucking the blood out of everybody around them for their own particular purposes. And I'm particularly concerned about the fact that what I see is this enormous rush to quickly beat the state out of shutting the door on their projects. A lot of it is driven by the cottage industry that exists in and outside of government around redevelopment agencies. We all know that. We all see it. We all know for local government officials, these are deals you love to make. It's one of the few things you can do with friends to help with local businesses. It's free money. City council people say to me, well, this is our free money. We don't have to go to the voters and ask for approval to issue these bonds or move this money around. We think of it like free money. And but what's happened to try to protect that source of free money, the blood supply for the agencies, is there's a lot of bad deals and bad financing going on right now. And so just looking at term sheets in recent days where San Marcos, Westmoreland, Lake Elsinore, Santa Ana, Turlock, San Bernardino, Fairfield are some of the agencies that have rushed out to quickly make a deal and sell some bonds. The low end of financing is 6.5%. The high end is 10% interest rates. They're paying unconscionably high interest rates, partly because of all of the uncertainty around this discussion and whether there's going to be a continuation of that funding stream, of what sort and what magnitude and so on. Now, I know, as an example, a worry I had before this discussion started is there are redevelopment agencies in the state that are on the edge of default on their debt obligations because of the decline in property values that has caused a diminution in their revenue stream and some risk that they have to worry about to see that debt service is properly paid for. We've seen that, I guess, most acutely, at least in a public way, in Contra Costa County, in West Contra Costa County, in small communities like Hercules. But there are other places that I hear from people in the business. We're a little nervous about this town or that town. They're mostly small deals. There's land financing deals and others. They're always tricky in a strong economic environment that now are perhaps getting worse because of the acceleration of these timetables, frequently without much the traditional careful analysis that you would hope for. Ultimately, the policy question, and it's one you've all been struggling with, and I understand, it's really a question of spending priority. I have yet to find a program of any sort, state, local, or federal, where the people say, you know, this is really a waste of money, and, you know, I don't know why you keep it up. All of them tell us how important and essential the program is. It's hard to dispute that, but that's not the question in this instance. The question is, what is the taxonomy of priorities? So what's highest and second and third and fourth and fifth? And so everybody has to make some value judgments about those priorities in our society, and it's hard to turn them into kind of a dispassionate empirical chart or analysis, but I at least find it offensive to be denying kids health care or taking away their children or teachers. Our communities are losing cops and firefighters. We're shutting parks and libraries, and somebody thinks this is a better way to spend the money than that. And it just, for me, it's a real clear priority. And maybe in a better time, in a better world, you can spend for priorities that are lower, but that isn't a smart thing to do, at least in this environment. And so, without the current tax increment financing system, there would have been another $32.2 billion for the previous decade that would have gone to schools and cities, counties, and special districts. That's a lot of teachers or whatever. It's worth noting that the tax increment share of the property taxes has been growing at a substantially greater rate than the property taxes themselves. And so I have a chart that I think we've given you, if you take a look at this one, which, and you can look at it either way, either before or after the pass-through. On the right, I think probably deducting the pass-through is a fairer way to show the numbers. So for those 11 years, 96 to 09, inflation increased by 37%, local property tax revenues increased by 153%, tax increment revenues increased by 247%. So the point is that tax increments grow at about 40% faster rate than local property taxes do. I think that amplifies the distortions in local finance. as their share, piece of the pie, continued to grow.
Madam Chair, may I ask the treasurer?
Yeah.
Would you give me a little more explanation on this bill, because why wouldn't it ride proportionately with the underlying property tax?
Because they keep taking a bigger piece by making more deals.
Oh, so they...
Yeah, so they can just keep expanding their deals.
Yeah.
And it may be one of the points that have been made. You may have a redevelopment zone that's 20 to 40,000 acres. A small piece of it has a growth in value due to development that goes on. But there's a whole lot of other stuff happening, whether it's inflation in property values or other investment or so on, that really wasn't caused by the redevelopment spending in any direct way, probably not any indirect way, and that those additional revenues keep getting poured over into the redevelopment agency pot. So that's partly what that reflects is there's been a growing piece of the property tax pie that goes to redevelopment agencies. And so I guess it's a little, in my mind, well, go ahead.
So then, just to go to the LAO's document that's in the, you've got it right there in front of you, I believe.
Yeah, I do.
On page 2, it has a chart that shows the allocation of property tax revenue. I guess that's more of it.
That's the same basic idea, although in this instance, we're adding how does the revenue generally go compared to this parabolic line of tax increment. So we've added a line, basically, because it's not frozen. We're adding the entire aggregate of property taxes for the state. So it's not a frozen line at the bottom. Property tax revenues go up statewide.
So the redevelopment agency collects everything that is happening in the redevelopment area, regardless of whether it's a result of a direct deal or not.
Right. Right. And they continue to issue debt and bonds that eat a larger portion of the available property tax.
You know, it's too bad there can't be some kind of an escalator for the baseline. You know, a certain percentage of the new growth or something. Anyway, just a thought.
There probably are a lot of suggestions, Senator Kehoe, for reform, many of which have probably been talked about over the years.
You know,
you're right.
And so what I hear basically is people saying, well, we do some good things. They do. They've done some good things. I don't think that's in dispute. It's how do we, you know, okay, so they'll say, well, we've done some good things. Get rid of the bad actors. The only thing I know to analogize to from my own legislative work is the first bill I carried in 1973, if I could start there. So I get here, and I have friends saying, you know, there are a lot of people that are getting criminal rap sheets about their neighbors and friends and business partners, and they're not supposed to have them. It's against the law. But somehow they're all floating around, and it's unseemly. And so my first bill makes it illegal, just across the board, period. Unless you're a law enforcement agency, you don't get them. And then everybody came out of the woodwork that was getting them in the past, saying, well, you know, we run a nuclear facility in California, and we need to really do background checks on our hires, or whatever it was.
Vampire nuclear.
And then we heard what the legitimate needs were from a lot of people, and so then we could start to say, okay, that makes sense to me. Let's figure out how to address your discrete need. But it wouldn't work the other way around. If I started with, well, I know there's some bad stuff happening, I'm going to stop it, I would never probably have known what the nature of the abuse was, what the problems were, which is why my conclusion is blow this up and start again. and it would be the prudent and smart and efficient way to do it. I think you're going to wind up finding a lot of very legitimate needs for tax increment mechanisms in some circumstances. And as much as it was good work done by Phil Eisenberg and others to try in the past to reform and address abuses, it was like saying, gee, there's some bad rap sheets out there and I'm going to go track them down and collect them. Better to just reinvent in this circumstance. And I think that this environment necessitates that and actually makes it a prudent approach to the matter. Thanks. I'm happy to respond to any questions and probably just try to mostly get out of the room before some people get me.
The sergeants are
From the vampires.
If there aren't any questions, former Senator Treasurer Lockyer, I want to thank you very much for your perspective and overview. And yes, the sergeant will escort you.
Thank you. Happy birthday to Mayor Bates's today. So.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Working on Tom's birthday.
All right. We'll now move into our hearing on restructuring redevelopment. First, I would like to ask Michael Cohen, Department of Finance, Chief Deputy Director, to come forward, and I'd like to invite Marianne O'Malley from the Legislative Analyst's Office to come forward as well. And Mark Whitaker, if you're coming with her, that's fine. All right. Who is the Senior Fiscal and Policy Analyst. I want to draw to everyone's attention before we begin, the LAO put out a briefing, should California end the redevelopment agencies. I hope we have plenty available here today. Hot off the presses, and I'm sure many of you in the audience are going to want to take a look at that. Let's first start with Michael. There you are. All right. Welcome, and the sergeants will escort you in and out as well.
I've already survived quite a few meetings with our friends at the cities and the Redevelopment Association, so I feel quite comfortable. Michael Cohen with the Department of Finance. With me is Chris Hill, the department's local government and redevelopment expert. Thanks for having me. Just to start very broadly in terms of describing the governor's rationale for his proposal, I do think you have to put it into the context of realignment, which you had a hearing on last week, as well as the state's efforts to really determine what responsibilities are best served at the state level and what responsibilities are best served at the local level, combined with, at the state level, figuring out what are core services. Obviously, we have a huge budget problem in front of us, and so one of our responsibilities as a state is to look back at all of the state's programs and figure out what is a core state responsibility. In terms of redevelopment, it also goes hand in hand with our enterprise zone proposal, which we'll talk about next week in this committee. But it's really a matter of returning decision-making authority on where a business should locate back to the local level. So redevelopment is really about trying to focus economic development within a particular blighted area, which at a local level is a perfectly responsible activity. The issue is the literature, as well as just thinking about it, is in essence the state is funding the moving of economic development that would have happened somewhere in the state and concentrating it in a particular area. So from a statewide perspective, there's really not a policy rationale, particularly when you start talking about the dollars involved. Redevelopment today is a program that costs over $5 billion. Because of the way Proposition 98 works, of that, about $2 billion is a state general fund cost for backfilling the lost property taxes that schools otherwise would have received if not for redevelopment. So it's in that context that we are proposing to end redevelopment agencies. We would designate successor entities, which would basically be responsible for ensuring an orderly payoff of all of the legal obligations of redevelopment entities. And so just to say again, the proposal is that we would continue to fund all legal obligations of redevelopment entities, including the pass-through agreements that are already in place that go to other local jurisdictions, school districts, counties, in some cases the city that's the sponsoring entity of redevelopment. The basic policy rationale underlying this proposal is to get more money back into core local services. So beginning in 2012-13, all of the money freed up from this proposal would be returned to local governments. We think it's about $1.9 billion. Of that, $1 billion would go to local school districts, and that would be on top of our existing Proposition 98 minimum funding guarantee. So this would be new money for schools in order to expand educational services at the local level. For cities, they would receive about $500 million more in general purpose funds. Counties, $300 million. Special districts, about $100 million. So in the case of cities and counties, if they continue to feel that their redevelopment activities are the highest and best use of their now general purpose dollars, we don't have any problem with them continuing to fund redevelopment activities. The issue is really getting them back into an environment, a county, a city general fund, where those decisions can be made. There's the various trade-offs that you as a legislature deal with all the time in terms of what's the best use for these dollars. In 2011-12, we are proposing a one-time state budget solution of $1.7 billion. So whereas going into the future, that $1.9 billion would go to local entities, the first year, most of that money, $1.7 billion, would be used to fund two state programs. The first is Medi-Cal, the second trial courts. Roughly half and half. And the rationale for that is clearly closing the large budget gap that has continued to emerge in this state. Clearly the state has lost revenues that otherwise would have gone to school districts, pushing state general fund costs up over the years, and so we think it's a reasonable proposal. The $200 million or so that wouldn't come for the state's benefit in that first year would go back to local non-school entities, so to start that process of getting money back into core services. In terms of housing programs, the redevelopment agencies have large housing balances, over $2 billion, and so those funds would not be touched. They would continue to be available for low and moderate income housing in similar ways that it's used now. A city could choose to continue to provide the housing programs, or transfer the money over to a local housing authority to go ahead and continue to provide the affordable housing. Obviously, redevelopments become a main economic development tool of cities over the last 50, 60 years. We recognize that taking away redevelopment will limit local government's ability to do economic development, and that's why we're proposing a constitutional amendment that would lower the vote threshold for local voters from 2/3 to 55% if the local voters want to continue to fund the redevelopment activities. They could either, by that 55% vote, authorize bonds to continue redevelopment activities, or to raise taxes if the taxes were dedicated to economic development activities. In addition, the redevelopment law itself would stay on the books, so those tools that cities have become accustomed to having in their toolkit to put property development deals together would remain. And so we think cities would be able to continue their economic development activities and simply be able to have those conversations with their local voters about whether or not this is worth their local dollars to go into these activities.
Senator Kehoe, question?
Thank you. When you say that the redevelopment law will stay in place and the redevelopment tools will still be available to local jurisdictions. You're talking about combining properties and eminent domain, that kind of thing?
Those things, exactly. Some of the streamlining of property development that that redevelopment can undertake right now.
Anything else in that list that is as high profile as?
Those are the main things. In talking to redevelopment officials and city officials that they cite most often to me in terms of the sort of non-financial benefits of redevelopment.
Okay, and that's in the governor's proposal as is?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to follow up on that. It's also the financing mechanism that's an issue. So part of your proposal, or part of the governor's proposal, is to substitute a local government 55% vote, but that's only for GO bonds?
It would be either either bonds or a tax increase, not property taxes. We're looking at sales tax and gas taxes as possibilities, and that those revenues basically could substitute for the increment that redevelopment associations and agencies have become accustomed to.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit later about that mechanism in detail. We do have on the books currently infrastructure financing districts, which are already state law, which are very similar to redevelopment agencies, but again, no school share is diverted, and they require the agreement of cities and counties who choose to form them. And right now there is a 2/3 threshold to do many of the things they do. But if we could change that by state law, which we can with majority vote, and I've introduced a bill to do just that, then you have a financing mechanism which could conceivably replace the RDAs. And still would allow the local communities to be able to have a financing mechanism for local economic development, which is something they really need after Prop 13. That was why these grew so dramatically in the 80s and 90s. It was on the books well before that, but their use of them grew because cleverly, innovatively, creatively, there needed to be a financing mechanism to do the things that had to be done at the local level. So we do need to replace it with something that may not have the exact functions, but does provide the financing mechanism to continue economic development. So we can talk about that perhaps a little bit more with the LAO. Did you finish?
Yes, I did. Okay. So just in closing, we understand this is a complicated proposal, and we look forward to working with the legislature over the next few weeks in implementing it.
Okay. If the committee has questions, we'll take them now for Mr. Cohen and then do the LAO and questions as well. I can begin if you'd like. Given Prop 22, which was passed in November, can redevelopment agencies help to balance the general fund without legislation or going to the ballot? Without legislation to either dissolve them or going back to the ballot to create more flexibility?
We don't think so. That basically Proposition 22 presumed that redevelopment agencies would continue to exist under state law, but it doesn't require that redevelopment agencies exist, which is why we ended up with our proposal. But it does lock into place, if the legislature continues to authorize redevelopment agencies, it locks into place the existing payment streams that are in place right now. And so you'd have to go back to the voters and amend the Constitution if you wanted to keep redevelopment agencies but change those financing streams.
So the notion that the state could require a redevelopment agency to hold schools harmless in the future or to make some agreement with counties and cities and special districts and schools that would be more equitable given the financial disaster that they're all facing. We can't do that any longer because of Prop 22.
That's correct.
So it's been that option, which might have been a good option, is taken away from us.
It's certainly over the last two budget cycles, the legislature has done such mechanisms to help to balance the state budget to the amount of $2 billion, and those types of solutions are off the table under Proposition 22.
Describe these successor agencies that you talk about?
Right. Basically, we're envisioning the entity that authorized and created the redevelopment agency. So in almost all cases, that's going to be the city, along with some type of participation and oversight by the affected jurisdictions, so schools, counties, and so forth, to ensure that all legal debts are paid and paid on time, but that all money that's not required to go to pay off debts will become available for local core services.
So if the city created the redevelopment agency, the city then would become the successor agency, but the other agencies would by law, or would by law be part of that successor?
More in terms of an advisory capacity, to where you could think of it as an advisory committee to so that they're just able to have a dialogue in terms of the pay down of redevelopment debts. But the city, or in the case of a county redevelopment agency, the county would be in charge of continuing to make those debt payments, so that there's not an interruption in terms of legal debts being paid.
And I'd like to ask about the debt. What exactly will continue to be paid?
The short answer is all legal obligations to outside entities, so that will include any bonds that have been issued, paying off bondholders, any contracts with third-party entities, all of the pass-through agreements. And those are the broad categories.
So essentially any contract that is signed?
That's sort of a legally enforceable contract, yes, that we don't want. If a redevelopment agency's made a commitment and is halfway through a project, we don't want to leave that project stranded.
So if a redevelopment agency last week signed a contract with the city to pay for part of its city manager, is that going to be upheld? Is that part of what continues to be honored?
That's not what we're looking at. Obviously, if you have a successor entity being the same person that you've got the contract with, that doesn't really work in terms of being much of a contract anymore.
How about projects? If you have a DDA, if you have an agreement, but you haven't sold the bonds yet, is that honored?
It'll depend on the circumstances, and we're still working on the specific language. And then obviously, this is there's lots of variations. I'm sure as you hear from the redevelopment agencies, you'll hear lots of examples. We've been talking to as many people as we can to try to figure out where the right spot is to draw the line in terms of what will be paid and what won't be paid.
Okay. Senator DeSaulnier?
Just along the same line, I've heard from a lot of agencies that there's been a lot of land banking in anticipation of going into DDA. So they're saying we're going to have all this property in a down real estate market. What do we do with that? We just give that to the successor agencies and the tools you've basically are going to give them and say,
that's right. And I think basically it's going to be a matter of the city councils who created the redevelopment agencies to sort of answer to their constituents in terms of any decisions they made over the last few months in terms of amassing property
But Paul, I'm talking about agencies have done this for years. They've
Sure.
land banked in all the best anticipation that they would accumulate the property, hopefully avoid going to eminent domain, and then have a larger package.
Yeah, and so the
So
city...
it's not the last few months what I'm talking about.
Okay, so the city, in that instance, would have all of these properties. They'd still have the tools to put the deal together. Certainly, in some cases, they might have to find an alternative financing source, go back to the voters and ask for that. But they would continue to hold the property, and it would still be the city's choice as to what the future of those properties
But to be
is.
honest, they've bought this property at values probably in a market that was very different from what we're dealing with now, and I'm sure we're going to hear this. They own the property in anticipation of accumulating them, and they've still got holdout parcels. And so we're going to say to them, well, you bought this at the high end of the market. We're going to give you tools, but they're less tools, and good luck.
I think they'll basically be required to go talk to their voters and say that hey,
with the governor and just be
that this is a top priority for the city to either, if it's buying a few more parcels up or so forth, and saying, hey, this is our top priority. We want our downtown or this region of a city to really turn around, and that we're asking you to to put money into it because it is
Okay.
a top city priority.
Okay, thanks. I'm sure we'll hear more about it.
Senator Hancock.
Yeah, just on that note, too. First of all, I would point out to Senator DeSaulnier, we also hear from millions of individual families who had exactly the same thing happen to them and who have been left with very few supports in this difficult time. That's why some of our choices are so excruciating right now. But I do think how we draw lines and where we draw them is going to be important. And I know that, for instance, in one of my cities, it isn't just land banking, but a lot of money has been spent on drawing up plans for a particular facility. A lot of community effort. It's really kind of ready to go, but there haven't been actual contracts signed. But clearly this isn't somebody trying to just contract with themselves to hold the money. So I would really urge the governor to look carefully at that, and we can share some of these things with you because we all hear the individual stories, to make sure that we don't cut off some things that really are in midstream that could be beneficial while doing what we may need to do in terms of ending these agencies, which I understand is hard for people, and a lot of people were hired by these agencies, and there's jobs on the line there as well. I've also found out some of my cities have been backfilling their general fund with redevelopment money. There's other things happening, and we just honestly have to look at all of that stuff. But I am concerned about one particular project that I know, because I've been involved with it over time, has been diligently pursuing the course and could get derailed. So I think formulas are going to matter.
Okay. I just have a couple more questions, and then we'll go to the LAO. Your certainty about the it was 1.7, and then you mentioned today 1.9. How certain are you of that figure? That's being contested everywhere. Where's it come from?
Sure. I think we're using the same data that everybody else at the state level is using, which comes from the state controller's office. It is relatively old in terms of 2008-9, and so there's certainly some margin of error. We're fairly comfortable with our number, but if we ever get better information, we'll certainly update our numbers, but at this point it represents kind of the administration's best estimate. But obviously you've got a moving target, you're adjusting for data from several years ago and trying to extrapolate it into the future, so of course there's some margin for error.
Okay, thank you. I want to welcome Marianne O'Malley from the LEO's office, and you have copies of your newest report.
Surely.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. As the Senator mentioned, our office just recently released a report, Should California End Redevelopment Agencies? And we have copies with the sergeant for anyone who'd like them. I'm also joined today with a call by a colleague, Mark Whitaker. I think it might be helpful to say, if this were 1952, the year Californians put redevelopment into the Constitution, we wouldn't be having this hearing today, even if the state were facing similar magnitude of fiscal problems. Because in 1952, the state wasn't responsible for backfilling schools. And in 1952, the county or the fire district could raise a property tax if it needed additional revenues to offset the effect of redevelopment. So at that time, redevelopment really was a purely local tool. It wasn't supported directly or indirectly by the state. Also, during redevelopment's early years, redevelopment agencies were pretty small. Relatively few cities created a redevelopment agency, and the project areas were small, typically about 10 blocks to about 10 acres to 100 acres, really just a segment of the city. And it was partly held in check by the pressure that the schools would place and the counties would place because they did want a very large diversion of their property tax base. Over the last 35 years, though, since we changed school finance and since Proposition 13, redevelopment agencies have grown dramatically to the point where most of our cities have redevelopment agencies, and many of our counties do as well. And the project areas have gotten quite a bit larger. There are several that are over 20,000 acres, which, to give you a sense, that's over 30 square miles. So we have so many cities and some counties creating redevelopment agencies and such large projects that in a couple of our counties, more than 1 out of every 4 property taxes is provided to a redevelopment agency. It's not provided to the schools or the county or the fire district. It's provided to a redevelopment agency. Statewide, 12% of the property tax is allocated to redevelopment. And that's not a problem in and of itself, except then when you have to pause and think, that leaves 88% of the property tax for all other purposes, for schools, for local public safety, for parks, for recreation, for the county health and social services program. So it's a question of, when you look at the overall property tax, should 12% of it be used for redevelopment, leaving 88% for all those other very important services? You should know that many other states have redevelopment, but California's redevelopment dwarfs all the other states by a wide margin. And it's not because we have so much blight in California, but it's because it's really for our local governments who are trying to do very important things in their communities. This is one of the easiest ways for them to raise flexible funds to be able to respond to their local constituents. If a city creates a redevelopment project area, it typically gets about 2 and sometimes 3 times as much property taxes from the areas in the redevelopment project than it gets from other parts of the city. And that's even after you count for the housing set aside and the pass-through. So there's an enormous fiscal incentive for a city to create a redevelopment project area, and in fact, a very, very large one. And also it's because these funds, these significant funds, they don't require a vote of the residents. They don't require consent of the other local agencies. And they can use these funds to respond to very important local priorities. They can use them flexibly. And we all know stories of redevelopment agencies really making a difference in a local community. Given the incredible attractiveness this tool has for cities and for counties. It's not surprising that the legislature from time to time has worried that perhaps local governments were overusing redevelopment in some way, and there have been actions that the legislature has taken to kind of limit it. Most notably in 1993, there was a very careful action to try to redefine blight to make it more limited so that cities and counties couldn't create such large redevelopment project areas. There's also been actions, for example, to say that you couldn't declare Williamson Act land under active open space easements to be blighted. And there were also actions to put a time limit on redevelopment. For new redevelopment projects, that's about 50 years of receiving tax increment revenues, and also to finally put an end on some of the old ones. The merged downtown one here in Sacramento was created in 1950, and under law now it'll finally end in the year 2031 at the ripe age of 81 years old. That said, again, this program is not in and of itself a problem, except to the fact that it redirects revenues from other entities. You mentioned, maybe I can turn your attention back to Figure 1, and that shows, that's on page 2, that shows how redevelopment works. So from the date a redevelopment project area is declared, the tax base is frozen, and any activity that generates property tax revenue growth after that time. And that could be simple inflationary adjustments or an independent decision completely unrelated to the redevelopment agency that I was going to expand a business or locate a business. That growth goes to the redevelopment agency. And the redevelopment agency keeps that growth for about 50 years. So let's just talk about a redevelopment project area that had a vacant parcel in it. And the business owner looked at that vacant parcel and said, I'm going to build my business here now, and built the business. For 50 years, none of the property tax associated with that new construction will go to the schools. It wouldn't go to the county, wouldn't go to the fire district until that business is at the ripe old age of 51. So how does this compare to other states? We just have a little bit of information on the bottom of 3. You'll find when you look at other states, tax increment financing varies. Many states have shorter periods. They don't allow the diversion to go on for 50 years. Some other states require opt-out provisions that a county would say, no, I don't want to participate. Or they explicitly exclude the school property tax from being part of the revenue base that could be redirected. If you turn then the page to Figure 2, which is on page 4, you could see some ways that the legislature has tried to mitigate the effects of redevelopment over time. And you can see there's the top, there's the tax increment revenues, and you can see on the right side there's a local agency pass-through. And by state law, redevelopment agencies pass through a portion of their revenues to other local agencies. Under current law, works out to be about 22%. So that is somewhat of a mitigation for local agencies. Doesn't mitigate most of the money, but there is somewhat of a mitigation. And then also, if you look on the left side, you'll also see some affordable housing funds. That is a restriction, a requirement on redevelopment agencies. I should point out, though, that Figure 2 doesn't show one of the other mitigation that Senator Walk mentioned before, which is in 10 years out of the last 20, the legislature has passed some law to require redevelopment agencies to redirect revenues to schools. And it was an acknowledgement that the state bears significant costs associated with redevelopment. So 10 years out of the last 20, and most of those years were during years of fiscal difficulties for the state. The state required redevelopment agencies to redirect. 1 year was overturned, but every other year it has occurred. So that was another way that the legislature has tried to mitigate the effect of redevelopment. Under current law, though, under Proposition 22, we don't think that those kind of opportunities are available for the legislature, leaving the cost of redevelopment then borne by the state. On the bottom there, on Figure 3, also on page 4, it shows what would happen to redevelopment agencies if you were to end the agency or if the agency the project area were to just dissolve and reach at the end of its sort of natural life. You could see that more than half of the revenues on the natural, under the current AB8 system of property taxes, would be allocated to schools, then there's some revenues to counties and to special districts. The administration's proposal, though, isn't entirely to dissolve this in this fashion, but includes for the first year a redirection for other purposes. And with that, why don't I turn to my colleague to present the rest of the report.
Let me just ask you a question about that.
Sure.
The allocation of property taxes, if the RDAs end,
Yes.
Is according to AB8. Okay, that wouldn't change. The administration proposes nothing different than the current distribution.
The administration's proposal, actually, in the first year is to use some of the funds. Actually, perhaps.
You want me to?
Yeah, why don't you want to walk us
Yeah,
through?
Mark Whitaker, Legislative Analyst's Office. The administration's proposal is, as we understand it, I mean, there would be a slight difference from what we show in Figure 3 as well, especially in the first year. They would
In the first year.
In the first year, they would allocate, a certain extent to offset state costs for Medi-Cal and trial courts. In the future years.
Right.
Our original understanding was that then the remaining shares after the redevelopment's debts are paid off would go out according to existing property tax allocation AB8 shares. Mr. Cohen testified earlier, it sounds as if also in future years they would continue to pay the pass-through payments. So you'd have a portion that is currently passed through under current agreements would continue, and anything left over after that would go out according to the AB8 shares.
Okay. Just a follow-up then to AB8. Could the successor agencies change the formula if they chose to? I mean, I understand AB8 and how it's in concrete, but I'm just curious.
I don't see any reason why the legislature couldn't authorize some kind of local variation on the AB8 formula. If the legislature changes AB8 allocations, it requires a two-thirds vote of both houses, but the legislature has authority to do that. There is, under Proposition 1A of 2004, the requirement that the school doesn't get any larger of a share. But if you were to imagine a world where you would take these funds and you could say it could be allocated pursuant to some kind of local agreement, I don't see any constitutional prohibition against that.
And just to add one thing on the allocation, the schools would not go out under their existing AB8 formula. What we're proposing is to make sure that every school district within the county benefits from these additional dollars, so that whereas on the natural, the money would go back to the school districts just within those redevelopment areas. We're proposing to spread those dollars out across the county.
Okay. Well, that would be the same case with the counties as well. You're not focused just on the project area, but broader than that. No?
I mean, the county, it's not so much a difference, because the money will come into the county general fund, and then they can decide to spend it however they choose.
So the school district share...
The issue is that you've got lots of different school districts within the county, whereas there's a single county government.
Part of the language would then make it clear that the distribution would be to all the schools,
That's
to all
right.
the districts.
Correct.
All the schools in the district, all the districts, all the districts.
I mean, we're still working on the fine tune. The key is to kind of get it so that it benefits every student within the county is the end goal.
Ms. O'Malley?
Sure. So next, we'd just like to go over some of our look at the effectiveness of redevelopment. Obviously, that's one of the key questions in determining your decision on whether or not to end the program. Back on page 5, there's a small figure 4, that summarizes very briefly our findings on the effectiveness of redevelopment, and I'll just highlight a few of those. First, I mean, it is a flexible tool, as Ms. O'Malley said, for cities to make targeted improvements within their communities, and in this sense, it has been very effective. Most of the research we've looked at shows that within a project area, property values do increase, and employment increases in some, and it does have those positive effects, which is exactly what we would expect to find given the public subsidy provided to those areas. So it is a good targeted economic development tool in that sense. It also has provided a significant amount of funding towards affordable housing. We weren't able to find any studies that compare how well redevelopment does at providing affordable housing, say, to other entities that are involved in affordable housing. But it has provided a significant source of that funding. We would note, however, that various audits and oversight studies have raised some concerns about redevelopment's use, specific agencies' use of redevelopment funds. I would say some agencies, each agency is different in its turn, but maintaining large balances of unspent funds, using a large portion of the funds for planning and administrative costs.
And if I could just interrupt you for a moment. Senator DeSaulnier, I believe your committee, Transportation and Housing, is going to be looking at this. I don't know the date, but...
We're going to have a joint hearing with Assembly Housing on Tuesday the 15th.
On this issue. Thanks. Comment.
And then perhaps our largest concern with redevelopment is essentially this is an over $5 billion a year program, and we would expect that any program with that amount of resources, there would be preponderance of evidence that it's effective, and that it's generating more revenue than it collects. And in our review of the evidence, we haven't found that to be the case. As we mentioned in the report, there are not a lot of studies that focus specifically on redevelopment in California. So we did look at some academic research on similar mechanisms in other states. Also, which there's not a huge base of studies to look at, but based on those, there's not any evidence that it's contributing to statewide economic growth. The one major study in California from the PPIC found that redevelopment areas, although they did increase property tax levels, did not increase them enough to justify the amount of funding that they were receiving from the property tax. When we look at the studies in other states, they find that it's really just shifting economic activity from one part of a region to another, not contributing to overall growth. And you find the same thing in terms of the studies that look at the effect on employment. You're essentially shifting jobs from one area to another. So we're a little concerned about the effectiveness of that, and that will differ from some other reports you might have seen, and if you look at the bottom of page 6 and 7, we do outline our concerns with some of the job loss numbers that have been reported by the redevelopment agencies. We would disagree with those findings, and that the overall effect is fairly minimal in terms of employment because of the shifting effect. And then further, therefore, if they're not producing all of the property tax revenue from their own activities, as has been said before, they are essentially shifting those revenues from schools or from the state in terms of backfilling the schools, and from other local governments who would have otherwise had that as general purpose revenue. And we estimate that effect, after taking into account the pass-throughs, of about diverting about $1.5 billion annually from local governments, and more than $2 billion annually from the state in terms of the backfill of schools. And just kind of the last thing on concerns with the existing redevelopment system is a system of limited transparency and accountability. Compared to most other local agencies, most public agencies in California, they don't have as much oversight or accountability. They are allowed to incur debt, sell bonds without voter approval. The state does not have a good mechanism of overseeing the formation of areas and so on and so forth. So that's a brief summary of effectiveness and concerns on the system. The next section of the report deals mostly with the governor's proposal, which was explained earlier, so I'll just kind of skip over that. But if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer those on the governor's proposal. And then just to end with our assessment of the governor's proposal, based on the evidence that I just went through, we have some real concerns about the effectiveness of the redevelopment program and think, therefore, the governor's proposal merits consideration. It would correct a problem in which redevelopment agencies run a program and make the decisions regarding that program, and yet the state and other local governments are really paying some of the bills for that. And if the benefits accrue mostly to local areas and local communities, it makes sense from a policy perspective for those local communities to be paying the cost for that program. It would improve accountability and transparency by returning this system and its cost to local officials. It would redirect funds to local governments. So rather than it's not going to shift funds away. It's going to provide them some more flexible general purpose funds that they can use for the services that meet their highest priorities. And of course, the 1-year fiscal benefit to help the state meet its current budget gap. The one issue that we would highlight where we don't agree with the governor's proposal is if you do decide to end redevelopment, you'll have to address the question of the treatment of the school's share of property tax. As you just heard, the administration would keep it out of the existing school finance system, spread it out countywide, not count it towards Proposition 98. And we don't really see a good policy reason for that. It is, after all, it is property tax. It should probably be treated as all other property taxes are. It doesn't make sense to further complicate an already complicated school finance system. And just in closing, this would be a large, complicated, and disruptive proposal to implement. There's no question about that. You're looking at agencies that have existed for decades, and it would be rather abrupt. And I would just point out that most of the proposals that you're being faced with in every other subcommittee and in every hearing are complicated and disruptive, and they're all going to have significant effects on the level of services, the economy, whatever you look at, whether it's realignment, the proposed cuts to higher education, the caps on medical services. These are all difficult choices. And, it's not as if you're being asked to choose between them. You're being asked to accept all of them. And so we recognize that you face a lot of difficult choices, and it's pretty clear that the state is not going to solve this budget problem without making some disruptive and complicated changes. In many cases, we've suggested alternatives to the governor's proposals, and recommended our own ideas. In this case, although we differ on the treatment of the property tax in the future years, we think it does merit consideration, and for the most part is reasonable and worth pursuing.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the committee? I have a couple that I'll start with. Let's assume for the moment that the proposal is accepted by the legislature and the agencies are eliminated and successor agencies come forward. Let me ask you, what then is the role of the state, in your view, in supporting the eventual, the reasons these are put together has to do with blight, economic concerns, economic growth, jobs. Let's say we send them away. Do we have a continuing role in assuring that jobs, economic growth continue? Should we be measuring that? Should we be monitoring that? What's our role as a state after that? Do we just kind of go away?
The state will always have an interest in all of its residents and all of its communities. And of course, you're going to want to take actions that would lead to an improvement of economic conditions throughout the state. Frankly, though, I think that one of the best things that the legislature could do is making sure that its fiscal house is in order, the state's fiscal house, so that we can create ongoing programs and have that kind of economic security regarding our programs. One of the other things that the state can do is taking a look at the state-local fiscal situation and the the economic incentives that local governments face to make sure that they're in line with the overall best direction for the state. It may well be that if you change local government finance and you give local governments greater incentives to promote economic development on the natural, not pursuing the sales tax dollar, for example, that you could overall result in greater economic activity in the state. You may also want to have some kind of targeted programs for communities that are low wealth, that communities that are facing enormous difficulties that are beyond their grasp. And so some kind of very limited tax increment kind of program might be unreasonable. But a program that is used as this current redevelopment program is, where it could be vast acreage, it's available to very affluent cities. It's available to places where the average per capita income is much higher than the average in the state. This program is too broad. But I think in terms of what the state could do, get the state's fiscal house in order, make sure our schools are financed in a steady and ongoing and predictable way, making sure that our state-local relationship is solid. Those are all things that I think could go a long way for improving economic development in the state.
Senator DeSaulnier?
You mentioned that, if I'm putting words in your mouth, Marianne, correct me, but you mentioned that we have a more robust approach to redevelopment than other states. So we hear a lot in this building about our competitive disadvantages, whether I don't necessarily believe that. But is there any studies that have shown that our aggressiveness has actually helped us retain businesses or jobs in a competitive marketplace with other states? So, for instance, NUMMI, I don't even know if that's in a redevelopment agency, but if it were, is it a tool that would help us keep jobs there? And is there any studies to that effect in terms of our competitiveness?
Most of the research suggests that a redevelopment area, because they have these public subsidies, are effective in terms of locating businesses.
Within California?
No, within that project area. We don't have any evidence that shows that overall it leads to net increase in jobs or economic activity in California.
Okay, so we don't show that we have more football teams, for instance, because redevelopment. Never mind, that was an editorial comment.
Any other questions? All right. Yes, Senator Hancock.
And this would be a little bit to the LAO, also to finance. I was interested in Senator DeSaulnier's comment about, again, as we look at ways of continuing this activity, some of these activities in a different way, how to more tightly target really blighted low-income communities or neighborhoods, so that we could try to make the subsidy available there as opposed to broader brush. I'm assuming you're looking at different formulas, Mr. Coleman?
Sure. We're happy to look at any alternatives in terms of replacement tools. I think, frankly, the states really struggled to keep programs targeted. Next week we'll talk about the Enterprise Zone program, where it started as a few pretty small areas, and that over time it's spread to zones all across the state and very large areas. So I think that's one of the problems. I think in our mind it's having more discussions at the local level about these types of things, rather than trying to create a state interest. But clearly, if you can find an alternative where there's a very limited state role with particular things, we're happy to take a look at that.
Actually, one of my redevelopment agencies did give me a set of suggestions that they thought might be helpful, and I did pass it on to the Department of Finance, and I'll be interested in your comments.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Cohen, before we move on to our other panelists, part of the discomfort is that there's no written language to look at. So these issues of formulas and successor agencies and all that. Here we are, February, whatever it is, the 9th. 9th, thank you. When might we see language? And I know, and I want to add, I understand. Ms. Cummings has made it very clear to the counties, and I assume to the cities and the redevelopment agency, and to anyone who will listen, that part of the reason for the lack of specificity is that you hope that those who are involved in this process at the local level will come forward with their suggestions, and as well as the legislature. So with that in mind, still, when are we going to see some language?
Soon is the best answer I can give you. Our council is back at the office right now working on it, as well as other staff. This is a top priority for the administration, but it is a difficult area of law. So I certainly hope that we can share it with you next week, and that's our goal. I'll do everything I can to make sure we meet that.
And have you had? I know that with respect to realignment proposals, the county the state CSAC, State Association of Counties, has been very much engaged with language and efforts, and internally. Have you had constructive meetings at the request of, or I know the governor's requested, or has the governor with the redevelopment agency, the League of Cities, and other interested parties about the proposal?
I've had personally a number of meetings, including with the League of Cities and the Redevelopment Association. The governor met with the League of Cities, as well as the mayors from the state's larger cities. So we're having lots of meetings and taking all the information they're providing to us in terms of some of the specifics of individual redevelopment project areas. Unfortunately, this isn't quite the same as the realignment proposal, where we could expect the same type of partnership in drafting the language. We're happy to engage in that partnership, but I understand the reluctance to sort of have assistance in writing our proposals. So, but we have been having lots of those discussions, and hopefully our final product will reflect some of the intricacies of redevelopment that we've learned over the past few weeks.
As someone who represents the Delta, I always believe it's better to be at the table than not when major decisions are being proposed by governor, legislature. Just my personal bias on that, experience on that. I would like both of you to come and sit up here, Marianne and Michael, and not go away, while we have all those who are going to advise us to come forward and sit in these chairs. John Shirey, Executive Director of the Redevelopment Association, the Honorable Bill Bogard, Vice President from the League of California Cities, and I have special greetings from Carol Liu to you, from our Senator. Gene Ross from the Budget Project, come forward. Gene Hurst from CSAC. And we have the Honorable Joe McKenzie, President of the Special Districts Association, and Lachelle Dozier, the Board of Directors of the California Association of Housing Authorities. So I'd like to all together. And we'll start first with John. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to everybody. I have prepared a fairly lengthy statement, which, if I were to give it, would far exceed the time that you've given me here this morning, so I'm just going to submit that and ask that at some point you get a chance to read it. I'm going to speak to some of the issues that are in your staff report, and I just want to say along those lines that I think your staff report raises a lot of good questions, and I would commend those to you, and I think they are important questions to have answers to as you consider the governor's proposal. I don't think it's going to surprise anybody here this morning to find out that we oppose the governor's proposal. We think it's a real bad idea.
We could hardly tell that from your public comments.
That's the essence of what you need to know, but I have more than that to say. We think redevelopment elimination would cost the state jobs. We think it's bad for local communities, but we also think it's bad for the state as a whole. I think it's more complicated than we might think, and you've heard admissions to that this morning here. And I suspect, Madam Chair, that's why we haven't seen language yet in terms of this proposal. And I learned something here in listening to Michael Cohen that I hadn't heard before, because, of course, there is no real language for us to look at. I also think it might produce less money than is estimated. You heard the Department of Finance say that they're using 2-year-old data. I don't have any better data to give you because it lags by that period of time, but we suspect property values are going down, and they may go down in property values in redevelopment projects areas as well. I also think that this proposal is probably unconstitutional, and the question for you to ask there of your lawyers is not the question whether or not you can eliminate redevelopment agencies. The question to ask is, can you have access to the revenue stream that otherwise would go to redevelopment agencies and that is slated in the Constitution to be used for redevelopment purposes? That's really the more targeted question that should be asked on the legal side. I don't want to dwell too much on studies and studies that others have done and studies that we have done. I do want to just make one editorial comment, and that is the treasurer here earlier pointed out to you that redevelopment project areas property taxes have grown a lot faster than everything else. And to that I would say, I hope so. I hope so, because if they hadn't grown, then that would be another indication that redevelopment wasn't making a difference. If we're making investments in project areas, those property values ought to grow faster, and quite a bit faster than property values as a whole. Nevertheless, I understood his point. Something about the various studies that are being done and where I think they miss the point. Another criticism has been made of us that, well, somehow redevelopment just rearranges where development goes. That if it didn't go here, it would go somewhere else. And what I want to say about that is, yes, that's exactly what redevelopment is supposed to do. Redevelopment is supposed to direct development in areas that otherwise wouldn't receive investment through private means alone. Redevelopment directs development to infill type development. It makes it possible to clean up contaminated properties, and we have thousands of those in California. Redevelopment makes it possible for more compact housing to be built closer to transportation corridors. Redevelopment is a land use policy. It doesn't really say that in the law, but it is. It's a land use policy. It directs where development should go, and it achieves objectives like making sure that we address brownfields before we sprawl further out to the fringes of our urban areas, and we simply go to the greenfields where development is always easier and it's always cheaper in the short term, but more expensive in the long term in terms of its cost of public resources. Now, I was glad that this hearing was entitled Restructuring Redevelopment as opposed to Abolishing Redevelopment. And I think you're having a constructive discussion here, and I want to add a little bit to that. First of all, I think the best studies are done with your own eyes and ears. Any number of elected officials, and Mayor Beauregard is going to follow me, can say that but for redevelopment in my community, this wouldn't have happened, that wouldn't have happened. Go with the mayor of Merced someday and walk around downtown with him, and he can tell you every property, every project, and he can tell you the history of it, and he can tell you whether or not it would have been done without redevelopment. Everybody can do that. They can show where their downtown is different today. They can show you affordable housing that wouldn't be there otherwise without redevelopment. They can show you the story, the anatomy of what's going on in their community if redevelopment hadn't been there. I think you want to do some sort of objective analysis of the consequences of eliminating redevelopment. I've talked about housing. It's the largest source of funding for housing in California next to the federal government. We have the highest cost housing in the country, second highest cost housing for rental. We have 1.7 million families in California that pay over half their income for housing. That's not a good situation. Eliminate redevelopment. What's going to replace that? This state, the Golden State, is crumbling. Our infrastructure is not what it used to be. We've got to fix it. We've got to maintain it. Redevelopment is a significant source of funds for local infrastructure. I've already mentioned contaminated properties. The Polanco Act gives us a great set of tools for us to, in effect, step into the chain of title for those polluted properties and clean them up. That's a cost that no developer will shoulder by himself because, again, it's easier and cheaper to go somewhere else. We talk about the tax dollars produced from redevelopment, and I think you want to think about that too. We think you're going to lose tax dollars as a result of eliminating redevelopment, both state dollars as well as local dollars. We sometimes get contrasted with other needs of the state, like, you know, we're going to pay for redevelopment, we're going to pay for schools. In my mind, that's a false choice. It's a false choice. Good schools are in good neighborhoods and vice versa. When we're providing good housing, strong business district, safe neighborhoods, we have better schools too. Mothers and fathers that are working, earning an income, those children are going to be better learners in schools too. It shouldn't be an either-or choice. We need both. We need both a strong economy and we need strong schools. And one of the things that disturbs me about the comments that I've heard on this proposal is that I've heard it's been decided that the state is not in the economic development function. That's not a responsibility of state government. Really? Really? Is that where we want to be in California? That we're not concerned about our economy as a whole? That we don't want to address, you know, what we can do to grow the economy in California? We eliminate tools that we have for economic development. You can bet there are cheers in the capitals of Texas, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, all of which make it a sport to poach businesses from California. I don't think that's where you want to be. I think we need to figure out how we grow the economy of the future. A few things to consider. Instead of us saying, you know, it's our money or your money, as the treasurer was reflecting on earlier, I think the better question for us to ask is, how can we make redevelopment something that works for the state and local governments? How do we make it work for all of us? And a few ideas along those lines. This state has passed landmark legislation, AB 32 and SB 375. We ought to all be proud of that. By the same token, local government people say, you know, you're not giving us any resources to implement that legislation. How are we going to get this done? Would there be a way of marrying the state's objectives to do something about climate change and local government needs to make that policy actually implementable? We carried legislation, sponsored legislation last year that was targeted to helping manufacturing and industrial businesses become more energy efficient. That legislation passed both of your houses, but it got vetoed by the then governor. And it got vetoed for stated reasons that had nothing to do with the bill. Maybe we ought to bring that back, you know, as part of a restructuring that you have talked about. We have talked about housing, but yet some people say, well, not all that housing money is used well. Wouldn't we be better off to have a discussion about how to more effectively and efficiently use that housing money to, again, meet those needs of those 1.7 million households in California that are spending way too much of their income on housing? I think those are the kinds of things where we ought to be able to come together on, as opposed to finding reasons to divide us. I don't know about you, but, you know, when I heard the president's speech, his State of the Union speech a while back, I was inspired. I thought it was visionary. And what the president talked about is, how do we win the future? Well, we ought to be thinking about how to win the future in California. We aren't seen as a good place to do business. We are seen as a place that has high cost factors. We aren't seen always as the place where, you know, growth is going to occur for the future in terms of our economy. The president said we ought to win the future. Part of that means we've got to look at the innovation economy. One of the things we learned about this recession is we lost millions and millions of jobs, both in California and nationwide, but economists tell us many of those jobs are not coming back. There might be a way to use the resources of redevelopment, which is a job supporter kind of program, a job producing kind of program. How do we use those resources of redevelopment to win the future? How do we use those resources to grow jobs to make California's economy stronger for the future? That would be a win for everybody.
Okay, thank you, John. I think we'll go through everyone and then have general questions. Okay, Mr. Mayor, Bill, welcome to the Senate. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Senators. I'm Bill Bogard, the Mayor of Pasadena and second Vice President of the League of California Cities. I recognize the importance of the work that you're doing today in examining these issues relating to redevelopment and the state budget, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. Mr. Shirey did a very good job, an excellent job in articulating the benefits of redevelopment and the concerns that exist with respect to the governor's proposal. We also appreciate the committee's analysis, which points out on page 2 that, quote, redevelopment has literally changed the way California looks, mostly for the better. Based on our experience in Pasadena, I agree with that remark. Redevelopment is the most significant tool that we have to improve urban cores to attract housing and businesses so our downtowns don't become ghost towns. It is difficult for me to imagine what Pasadena would be like if not for the powers and the authority of redevelopment. Starting back in the 1970s, redevelopment has provided the momentum for turning downtown Pasadena into a showpiece that we are all very proud of today. There are some examples of what Pasadena has accomplished, which I hope are exemplify other accomplishments around the state. During the last decade, we experienced the production of about 5,000 new residential units. More than 15% of those units were affordable because of the city's commitment to create affordable housing as part of the ongoing life of our community. We have projects that are significant complements to the Gold Line, which began operations in the city in 2003. The Del Mar Station, 430 apartment units. Paseo Colorado, 350 apartment units. And at the eastern boundary of the city, still another project at the Sierra Madre Station of 288 residential units, apartments. These units, although not classified as affordable, except to the extent of approximately 15%, provide housing that is very much in need in the marketplace today. We have projects for which the city is well known. Old Pasadena could not have been accomplished without redevelopment, and we have hotels that serve as a basis for tourism as well as business at institutions like Jet Propulsion Laboratory and Caltech. Hotels, the Western Hotel, the Sheraton Hotel, the Marriott Courtyard, and others that we hope to bring. Over the last 15 or 20 years, we've experienced the creation of a couple of tens of thousands of new jobs in the city, and the city has become a regional metropolitan center for employment, for business, for arts and culture, for education, and serves a population 4 or 5 times the size of the city itself for cities in the area that haven't pursued an active redevelopment program. Redevelopment has been around for over 60 years, and it is clear that the legislature has recognized and supported the process throughout that period of time. For example, the legislative findings on the need for redevelopment emphasize that redevelopment of blighted areas is in the interest of health, safety, and general welfare of the people in affected communities. It is a tool to be used when conditions cannot be expected to be reversed by private enterprise alone or governmental action or the local regulatory police power. That blighted conditions contribute to increased governmental cost for crime prevention and other social costs. That these conditions reduce the incentive for individual landowners to improve their properties, and that remedies for these conditions benefit all inhabitants of the community. Is redevelopment a perfect tool? Not at all. Can this tool be improved? Certainly it can be. But the governor's proposal to eliminate redevelopment is short-sighted, particularly when considering the complexity of economic development and the momentum that is required over a period of time to assure that efforts made in 1 year ultimately have fruition 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 years later in terms of economic development and new jobs. It has been a frustration for us at the local level to watch the state lurch from crisis to crisis without a commitment to disciplined planning. In December, Governor Brown showed a chart at his briefing on the state budget at the Memorial Auditorium that clarified that between 75 and 85% of the budget solutions that the state has made over the last few years never materialized. In other words, they were not real or effective solutions. In 2009, the state borrowed $2 billion in local property taxes, took another $2 billion from redevelopment, and tried to take all of our local transportation funds. And now here we are again, the state looking at taking our funds. Since the language for the proposal has not yet been released, we do not know all of the details, but we strongly believe that this proposal has major constitutional flaws. At the November ballot, the voters passed Proposition 22 by more than 60%. They sent a message that they are tired of the state taking local revenues. We believe that the voices of voters on protecting local revenues should be listened to carefully as their voices on taxes. Cities care about California and want the state to be successful. We appreciate the challenges you face and want to be constructive partners, but destroying local economic development tools and harming local communities is not going to work. We need to find a way to restore the state-local relationship that is now badly broken. Any proposal that affects local government needs to be constitutional, consistent with voter intent, and fair to all local government. We cannot accept another raid that we know, based on experience, will simply precede still another take of local funds in the future. Thank you once again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And now I'm going to take out of turn. I'm just going to switch the Jeans, if that's okay with you, Jean. Jean Hurst from CSAC. And I would ask the rest of you, I let the first two speakers go on. That's my mistake. We do have a caucus at noon, and I do wish to hear from the folks in the audience. So please just be concise.
Thank you, Senator Wolk. I certainly am appreciative of your consideration of my time schedule. I'm Jean Hurst from the California State Association of Counties, here today to attempt to provide some input on the impact of redevelopment to California's 58 counties. I do want to be clear that CSAC has no formal position on the governor's redevelopment proposal. However, we do have a strong vested interest in the allocation and use of the local property tax, and it's from that perspective that I offer my comments today to provide some context to the current debate. As you will undoubtedly hear in public comment later, we have many counties who feel very strongly about the successful achievements of their own redevelopment agencies. On the other hand, we also have counties who feel equally strongly in the opposite direction. So I just want to be clear that our 58 counties have varied attitudes about redevelopment in general. We have 58 spots on the love-hate continuum, is what I've been calling it. The latest data shows 31 county redevelopment agencies, with 5 of those inactive, and there are 5 jointly formed city-county redevelopment agencies, many which serve the purpose of redeveloping now closed military bases. So to be fair and balanced, as I try to be, counties love their own redevelopment agencies and often gripe about city redevelopment agencies. And the legislature, as Mr. Detweiler knows, is very familiar with those gripes. But it's not as schizophrenic as it seems once you consider the essential difference between the two, and that's control and choice. When a county forms a redevelopment agency, it does so considering the myriad needs of its communities and its ability to fund public services. It can make informed choices about redevelopment activities because it does so in the broader context of its budget constraints and its community needs. When a city forms a redevelopment agency, the county has little or no say. And if a county disagrees with the redevelopment agency on decisions on boundaries or specific projects, its remedies are very limited, primarily to the courts. And since the statutes are such that redevelopment agencies have great autonomy, the county often finds itself in a losing battle. There are considerable disputes between counties and redevelopment agencies. We tend to argue over pass-through calculations, blight standards, deadline extensions, mergers of project areas, things you are all very well aware of. But we argue over these issues because we want the greatest predictability and stability of our primary revenue source, which is the property tax. The governor's proposal anticipates that about $1 billion in local property tax would return once redevelopment agencies are eliminated. That's a lot of dough to a county that would otherwise wait decades, even generations, for that revenue, particularly in light of the governor's proposal on realignment, which would transfer significant increased responsibilities for public services to counties. Make no mistake, eliminating redevelopment agencies is a big deal, a significant policy discussion that you all are undertaking under very tight time constraints. but I think the public debate that's occurring is a healthy one. It's fair to say that very few Californians understand how tax increment financing works or appreciate the disparities in property tax revenue received by local agencies up and down the state. As we communicated with you last week, from a policy perspective, it is worth having a discussion about which level of government should be responsible for what kinds of services and how those services should be funded. We are very interested in discussions that focus on additional tools for economic development or reforms to the current redevelopment construct. We have a great deal of interest in ensuring that our communities are able to find the resources to provide for infrastructure and public facilities, but at the same time, we are interested in a balanced and stable state budget and sufficient resources for the other critical public services that counties provide on your behalf. So as you consider these admittedly controversial and challenging issues, we would just ask that you consider a greater role for all local taxing agencies when determining appropriate use of tax increment dollars or alternative economic development funding mechanisms. We believe cooperation is the key here as we as a state discuss a fundamental shift in how public services are provided from a broad context, who provides them, and how they are funded. With that, I'll close, Madam Chair. Thank you. I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Jean Ross of the California Budget Project. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for your time. I appreciate it. It's a long hearing on a very important topic.
Before Jean leaves, I'm sorry, I noticed that you had your testimony in writing. Mm-hmm. Could you make sure that the members of the committee have that? Thank you. Mm-hmm.
I'm here to speak in general agreement and support of the governor's proposal to phase out redevelopment. We have certain concerns, particularly with respect to the post-budget year property tax allocation, and I think we're sympathetic to the issues raised by the legislative analyst in that regard. We're not opposed to the continuation of local economic development activities, and in fact, we think that the structure that the governor has begun to outline preserves that very important role. What we're concerned about is the state's subsidy for that activity in the absence of control. And I think Ms. Hurst sort of pointed out what you feel about redevelopment, I think, depends a lot on how much control. And I think, unfortunately, in the current structure, the state has very little control. This debate takes place within the context of an absolutely horrendous budget crisis that has been ongoing, and I think there is a tremendous desire to try to find a way to stabilize the state's fiscal condition. I think this is an important part of that dialogue. You face tough choices. You are going to make decisions that you would not make in any other fiscal climate this year. And we're deeply concerned that if this proposal is not part of a final balanced solution to the state's budget crisis, as to where you'll find the other $1.7 billion. There are incredibly deep cuts already on the table. It's hard to imagine where you would come up with resources of this magnitude. At the heart of this debate, and I think the staff's excellent briefing paper really raises these issues to the fore, is a very fundamental debate around governance and accountability in California. And I think it deserves that serious look. And we have a chart that looks at the allocation of the property tax dollar going back to Proposition 13. We've sort of crunched the data in a little bit different way than the state treasurer. But what that shows is a very significant increase in the share of the pie that goes to redevelopment. The last year prior to Proposition 13, the 2% figure to redevelopment, most recent year for which we have data, 12%. If you net out pass-through, it's probably more in the range of about 10%. But that's a five-fold increase in the share of the pie. And I think this is significant because of what it means for the state budget in the post-Prop 13 era. Proposition 13 first shrunk the pie, and then what we've seen over the intervening years is an increase in the share of the pie that goes to redevelopment, pushing an ever-increasing share of the cost of education onto the state budget. And that is really, in many respects, what's at the heart, or at least part of the heart of the state's ongoing budget problems. And if you look at where California is different than the rest of the nation, it really is that fact that in California we pay for a much larger share of education at the state level than do other states, which pay for most of public education at the local level. Why is this significant, and why has this happened? And if you look, and I think the Treasurer touched on this issue, in the post-Prop 13 era, there's no check and balance on the growth of redevelopment. Prior to Proposition 13, even though we'd had redevelopment for decades, a relatively modest share of the pie, because each time you pull money into a redevelopment area, a city, a county, school districts had to increase their local property taxes to make up the difference. So that kept voters at the table and kept some pressure on cities to make smart, and certainly there are some county redevelopment agencies, most of the money is at the city level. It kept voters at the table to force cities to make smart decisions. Now that you have the 1% rate cap, which prevents those increases in other property tax rates, and the fact after in the post-Prop 98 era that the state steps in to backfill education, we don't have that check and balance. We don't have that accountability at the local level, and I think that really is what this debate is all about. I would like to speak a little bit to the research, because I think walking around is important, but I think research, and particularly good in-depth research, is also important. And in this respect, and I passed out a summary that we did, it isn't our research, it's our review of the best independent, academically rigorous research that we can find. Redevelopment doesn't pay for itself. The PPIC report, which it admittedly is old, but it is consistent with all of the other research that's available, found that for the state as a whole, redevelopment generated about half, the value of the increased property taxes created through redevelopment is about half the cost of the summary. And in fact, they found that about a quarter of the projects they looked at, quote unquote, paid for themselves, but a quarter of the projects actually had negative property tax growth. So, in the middle, you're not paying for yourself about 50 cents on the dollar. And I think that's important. And I know the chair in particular, and all of the members of this committee have been very concerned with outcome accountability, performance-based budgeting. This is a program that's not performing. All of the evidence, and this is to Senator DeSagnier's question in the past panel, both in California and nationally, is that redevelopment doesn't influence interstate, international competition for jobs. To the extent it has an impact, it's within a pretty constrained geographic area. And in fact, there are studies, not in California, but of programs similar to California's, that have found that where you see employment increasing in a tax increment area, redevelopment area, you actually see negative growth, particularly when tax increment financing, what we call redevelopment, is used to subsidize retail activities. And I think that's critical given the amount of retail that's been subsidized in California. So not only do you not see a net increase, in many cases you can have a net decrease in jobs and a net decrease in property values outside of a redevelopment area because of the competition to move into that area as well. And I think that's important. I think you will hear about the study the redevelopment agencies have done, which looks at a gross figure of 300,000 jobs. I think the legislative analysts did a good job of critiquing that. Just be wary. So what should you do to conclude? Ideally, this is a program you might want to amend, not end, largely because of Proposition 1A of 2004, more recently Proposition 22. You probably can't do what you would want to do, which leads you to the option that the governor proposed. We are concerned about the elimination of funding for housing. I think particularly if you look at something along the lines of what the legislative analyst outlines for property tax allocation post-budget year, you can divert some of the state savings to a new, better, more finely targeted housing program as well. But on balance, in these very tough budget times, we think the governor's proposal is a good one.
Thank you, Jean. The Honorable Joe McKenzie, President of the Special Districts Association. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senators. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion today. My name is Joe McKenzie, and I am president of the California Special Districts Association, and I'm also president of the Vista Irrigation District located in North San Diego County. I was elected to that district in 1992. I must preface my comments this morning by stating that CSDA has not adopted a formal position on the governor's redevelopment proposal. However, we look forward to working together with you and the governor as we seek to address the challenges facing our state and communities. As you know, CSDA represents all types of special districts. Our nearly 1,000 members provide services such as flood protection, water, sanitation, parks and rec, healthcare, library, and fire protection to families throughout the state. To put that in perspective, over 11 million people receive fire protection from special districts. Millions more are served by water districts, sanitation districts, and other districts providing core public services in an exceptionally focused and locally driven manner. Each and every special district was created by its constituents because they wanted quality-focused core services provided to their families. These communities depend upon special districts for some of their most essential services, which are fundamental to a thriving and sustainable community. CSDA appreciates the seriousness of the state's budget situation and the context in which Governor Brown's proposals have been put forward. Of course, today we are focused on one of the central components of the budget, realigning services and funding from the state to the local level. As Governor Brown's budget summary states, his budget seeks to return power to special districts, cities, counties, and school districts in order to allow decisions to be made by those who have the direct knowledge and interest to ensure that local needs are met in the most sensible way. California special districts specialize in that direct knowledge and interest in meeting the local needs. Our elected boards are representative of the community and focus solely on delivering the vital core services for which they were created. Special districts are the closest form of government to the people. In his State of the State address, Governor Brown declared that core functions of the government must come first, reiterating his budget proposal to provide revenues for core local services. CSDA applauds the governor's commitment to core local services and looks forward to working with this committee, the legislature, and the governor in finding the best way to meet that commitment. Referencing RDAs and special districts, our relationship with redevelopment agencies is much different than RDA's relationship with the cities and counties that establish them. When a redevelopment agency is created, it diverts new property tax dollars away from traditional city and county activities, as well as special district and school district services to fund redevelopment projects. A city that creates the redevelopment agency makes an economic decision based on the cost to the city, but is not obligated to take into account the cost to other local agencies. When a city establishes an RDA, special districts, school districts, and counties help fund that RDA, but have no say in its creation, influence over its operation, or choice over participation, all of which some states do require. It's important to note that redevelopment projects sometimes focus on developments that increase sales tax revenue to the city or county, and special districts do not receive any sales tax revenue. Special districts can benefit from economic development, and some districts have benefited under certain circumstances where the RDA partnered with the district in a fair and equitable manner. However, this is not always the case because in California, special districts are not afforded the necessary standing to effectively negotiate with RDAs. Primarily, a district does not have the ability to opt out, as it does in some of the other states. Therefore, districts cannot weigh the potential future benefit an RDA may bring against the immediate cost to the district's core services. As the committee background paper indicates, it is estimated that in 2008-2009, redevelopment agencies received $519 million of property tax revenue that otherwise would have funded fire protection, parks, water, sanitation, and other special district services. CSDA has reviewed the redevelopment plan outlined in the January 10 proposal and looks forward to analyzing the specifics of how this proposal would be implemented. Because CSDA represents such a diverse membership and the impact on each special district is unique, the vital core services and infrastructure they provide could vary greatly depending upon the yet-to-be-released details of the governor's proposal. As we learn more details of the proposal and as the legislature further considers them, CSDA will be at the table and prepared to work collaboratively. It's the details that we need to be able to tell you the extent of what this redevelopment, realignment will actually have an impact on the types of districts that we do have in our membership. Special districts understand how tough the choices are that our state now faces and how difficult the legislature's job will be. Likewise, we appreciate the contribution and roles that each type of local government plays in California. Counties, cities, and schools are our partners, and we enjoy a strong working relationship with them. Regardless of the policy decision the governor and the legislature choose to make concerning economic development, our focus is ensuring that core services to residents will continue uninterrupted. Our top concern is that the Californians who have depended upon safe and reliable water, fire protection, parks, and other vital services remain. While we acknowledge the challenges we all face in providing services with limited resources, we are prepared to work together with all stakeholders in meeting those challenges. Thank you again, Madam Chair and Senators.
Thank you. And Lachelle Dozier, welcome. Board of Directors, the Association of Housing Authorities. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Lachelle Dozier, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency. SHRA is a joint powers agency that serves the dual role of being both a housing authority and a redevelopment agency. I speak today, though, as a member of the California Association of Housing Authorities. This is an association of over 65 public housing authorities. I have with me today a letter from CAHA that supports the continuation of redevelopment in the state of California. So I would like them to pass that out. As housing authorities, we are particularly concerned with the proposal to eliminate redevelopment agencies. We see and serve the most vulnerable families and have extensive waiting lists for families seeking safe and stable housing. Redevelopment and the tools that it offers provides the necessary resources to create and preserve affordable housing, as well as provide the necessary place or community for many of the residents who live and work. I would like to talk about 3 important points for your consideration. First, redevelopment and housing authorities are complementary and in many ways are vitally connected. The redevelopment agencies and housing authorities serve lower-income communities through different approaches. Redevelopment agencies serve disadvantaged lower-income communities by providing safe and vibrant environments through investment in housing, parks, community centers, safe streets, access to healthy food, and by definition, redevelopment agencies work to eliminate the negative influences of vacant and blighted properties. The primary mission of housing authorities is to provide safe, quality housing opportunities for low-income families. In many cases, public housing is located in redevelopment areas, some of the most economically and socially challenged communities. Redevelopment helps to level that playing field in these disenfranchised and distressed neighborhoods by investing local funds that leverage federal resources and provide private capital to improve the health and well-being of the people who live there. In Sacramento, the Oak Park redevelopment area, where one of our 16 public housing communities is located, redevelopment has come in and invested resources that provide for pedestrian-level lighting, new sidewalks, curbs, crosswalks, landscaping to enhance pedestrian safety and improve access to local businesses for our residents that live in these areas. In addition, with community support, we demolished 2 troublesome liquor stores, one which was actually located near a public high school. This helped decrease crime and created development opportunities for affordable housing on those now vacant lots. Public housing funds alone cannot provide these broader community investments that help uplift communities, creating a sense of place and planting seeds that produce thriving neighborhoods. Obviously, the value of redevelopment as a housing resource cannot be overstated. The federal government, through housing authorities, is the largest investor of affordable housing. However, redevelopment serves as a key tool for development of new affordable housing. In fact, it is the state's primary producer of affordable housing. In Sacramento, more than 10,000 units of housing for very low-income and homeless families were created over the past 6 years using redevelopment. Without redevelopment, the investment of more than $81 million in funds set aside for affordable housing, which leveraged over $1 billion in private and public capital for housing, would not have happened. This leads me to my second point. Redevelopment leverages federal dollars available to housing authorities to improve communities. The redevelopment link provides the local match to ensure that California housing authorities are well positioned to compete for limited federal dollars and to create and preserve affordable housing. In Sacramento, $3.2 million in tax increment funding leveraged $10 million of competitive federal recovery funds. These funds were awarded to California exclusively to rehabilitate our downtown public housing high-rise for low-income seniors. It was the only award that was given to California. If not for redevelopment funding, leveraging these competitive funds would not have been possible. Public housing is often the safety net for our vulnerable population and our communities that we continue to work in and try to grow. The new face of public housing is thousands of families displaced by the foreclosure crisis, which has forced them out of home ownership in search of affordable rental housing. Despite this unprecedented surge in the ranks of those in need of housing assistance, resources are stretched thin by diminishing resources from the federal government. Yet housing authorities are continually being charged to do more with less. Dissolving redevelopment as a provider and monitor of affordable housing and shifting those responsibilities to public housing authorities without significant resources would be tantamount to an unfunded mandate. Housing authorities simply do not have the financial resources to assume the obligation for monitoring and recapitalizing affordable housing created with redevelopment resources. Even if housing balances were transferred to local housing authorities, as suggested under the governor's budget proposal, it represents only one-time funding. After those funds were depleted, housing authorities would find themselves seriously overburdened and unable to fulfill state housing mandates and goals without local resources required to maintain those units when they begin to show signs of wear and tear and to preserve their affordability into the future. Redevelopment leverages federal funds to reposition large, severely distressed public housing properties and transform them into better communities. The proven key to develop these are programs at the federal level like the Hope 6 and the Choice Neighborhood programs. San Francisco Housing
You have
Authority.
how many more pages there?
I'm almost to the end.
I appreciate that.
I'm going to cut
Everybody-
it short. I know I'm the kind of
everybody's
last
gone
person.
over. It's been 10 minutes.
I know I'm the last person, so I'm going to try and make sure I get the most important points out there and
Thank
keep
you.
going. So in San Francisco, we saw this, where we repositioned very large public housing, and we used the resources from the federal government to reposition Valencia Gardens. And this is the same exact approach that we are trying to do in Sacramento. We have 3 large distressed public housing units that were built in the 50s. And without the resources from the federal government, as well as the resources of the local redevelopment agency, we cannot reposition that and make sure that we have housing for 2,800 residents. So the last point that I want to make, and I'm sure you're glad you want to hear that last point, is eliminating redevelopment will have unintended consequences if housing authorities were left to fill the gap. Without these funds, we need the local match, and the private resources would be lost. We have been able to successfully do this in Sacramento through a number of different programs, and I will leave a lot of my comments here so that you can read through them. But the main points that I really want to make in terms of the unintended consequences, and to really give you just one quick example of what that looks like, is in our community called Phoenix Park. This was a very distressed community, had been plagued by crimes for 30 years. We had people who were living there in fear for their life. We had a resident, his name was Henry Peterson. He was 51 years old. He was the first victim of a homicide in that particular community, and this continued year after year after year. Finally, we stepped in with redevelopment dollars, $7 million, leveraged $84 million, and changed that community. We have not seen a murder there since the redevelopment agency has stepped in with the housing authority since that time. So I really urge you to look at a lot of the unintended consequences of the actions that are proposed in the governor's proposal, and the fact that it will be very, very difficult for housing authorities to take on this responsibility without the continued funding stream. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. First, we're going to have, I want everyone to remain there. If there are questions or comments by the committee for any of the speakers, we should do that. And then we'll go to public comment, and first will be Assemblymember Norby, who has joined us. And I want to welcome as well Senator Fuller, who's a member of our committee. But I do want to start with John Shirey and the mayor. John, you said that basically we should use our eyes and ears and take a look at the benefits around us, and certainly that's true in many of our districts. But here's the problem with that discussion, and maybe you can help me in maybe broadening the discussion. I've gotten, and I represent 14 cities. They all have, I think they all have redevelopment agencies, maybe one or two has an inactive one. And there's no doubt about the list of projects that they allege would never have been done otherwise and have made tremendous benefits to the community. That's true. When I talk to council members and members of the boards of supervisors one-on-one, and I say, how much money does in 1 year did your redevelopment agency divert from the schools? They generally don't know. Or if I ask how much was diverted in 2008-9 from the counties, they don't know, or from the special districts. And I had a very interesting exchange with one of my council members who was really shocked at the amount of money that came from the schools, the school share. And this particular council member said, well, surely there must be a way we can work on this. And the reason was that the school district was going to be coming to the community to ask for a parcel tax, another one, that was going to be the exact amount of money that was diverted that year. And I would say for both of us, that was a revelatory moment, and I think illustrates the problem with the discussion. There's no doubt that there have been good things done with redevelopment. Mayor, you listed them. But that's not the end of the discussion. And for us, it's not whether they're good or bad, it's that there's no more money to backfill what has been billions of dollars of expenditure out of the general fund. That is the issue. And we ought to be able to grapple with that as people who represent the same tax dollar. It's the same tax dollar. It's not yours or mine. It's the same tax dollar that the local person believes they pay and should be getting services. So help me with that. Don't you think, why can't we stipulate, yeah, there have been great things done. Sometimes there haven't, but they're great things. But there's a cost to that. And don't you think that decision makers ought to be weighing those costs and balancing them? They may well decide it's worth doing, but they need to recognize the cost and not resent when the state suggests, well, given the incredible budget deficit that every single one of the locals in this audience have told me, no more smoke and mirrors, that if we suggest, well, maybe there should be some revenue sharing done, maybe that's not such an unreasonable position.
Well, Madam Chair, I think you've done a very good job of describing the situation, and I'm not going to sit here and say that there shouldn't be discussions about those issues, and your last suggestion about some sort of revenue sharing arrangement might make some sense. There were attempts to try to address that issue. Frankly, before 1993, schools were not getting very much pass-through money from redevelopment agencies because, unlike counties, they weren't aggressive in negotiating those agreements with agencies. If you look at,
I agree.
If you look at the way counties receive funds versus schools, counties do pretty well, schools not so well. And that was one reason why in 1993 there was a mandatory pass-through put into the law so that schools, in effect, would not have to negotiate those agreements. They would automatically get their, property tax share. I don't know that under certain kinds of discussions and ideas that we're trying to come up with here in terms of how we might square the situation, that it wouldn't be possible to provide more funding through schools. I would say, on the other hand, though, as your staff has many times pointed out to us, there is a cost to the state because of that backfill to schools. But yet, the legislature took action last year that would take the $350 million that comes from redevelopment agencies, instead of that going to schools, as was slated for it to occur, it's now going to go to trial courts. And I look in the governor's proposal, and the first year, the $1.7 billion, that isn't going to schools, it's going to trial courts and Medi-Cal. So I think that there are some inconsistent messages here, but I do think there is a growing awareness and a greater sympathy on the part of local city and particularly city officials that we got to do more to help schools.
It's relieving the general fund that is the issue. It is only the schools who are reimbursed by the general fund. Of course, there's also the car tax that we reimburse communities for as well. And we do that willingly, but that's in the billions. There's no more money. Mm-hmm. So if it's not this proposal, it's going to have to be something else that will also affect cities and those people in redevelopment agencies. So I don't really need to say anything. Perhaps, Mayor, you would like to speak to that. Do you know how much money you've diverted from schools? You have, by the way, I should preface it by saying, since Senator Lieu is not here, who, that when I was on the Board of Supervisors, we had our conference in your community, in the redevelopment area. It was beautiful, wonderful, no doubt about it. We were all jealous, no doubt. But that came at a cost to your schools and your counties and your special districts.
It was the result of an allocation of resources that local cities have benefited from. I don't know what has been diverted away from schools or what has been paid to schools in specific amounts through the pass-through process. And I respect the complexity that you and your colleagues, the legislature, are struggling with. I think cities would be a derelict in their duties if they didn't participate actively in the debate and bring
I appreciate that.
the benefits and the concerns relating to dropping redevelopment totally to the attention of the legislature so that ultimately a resolution can be arrived at.
Do you have a pass-through agreement with your schools?
We do.
But you don't know how much was diverted
I don't.
in 1 year?
I don't. I'm sorry.
Do you have a pass-through agreement with your county? I mean, it's L.A.
That I don't know.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Questions from the panel? I didn't mean to monopolize this. Any of you? Again, Ms. Dozier. Ms. Dozier.
I remember.
Ms. Dozier, indeed. Senator DeSaulnier's committee will be having a complete hearing a focused hearing on redevelopment and housing at the Transportation Committee on the 15th. So
we'll look forward to it.
I'll be there.
Further questions of anyone on the panel? Okay, I have none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we now have public comment. Can I see a show of hands as to how many folks are going to want to speak? Okay, and I'm going to ask, remember, you're coming forward from each city, and you're going to tell me the wonderful things. I stipulate to all of that. My community as well. I'm also going to ask you how much money was diverted from the schools, from the counties, and special districts in the year 2008 or 9. All right, Mr. Norby, you're first. Welcome, Assembly Member.
I really appreciate this opportunity as a member of the public and not a senator to speak to you about my experiences with redevelopment. I do support the governor's program. I want to share with you, if you have those, some information that I have put together over the years on redevelopment. And I hope you find it helpful. If you don't read my flowery prose, you can take a look at the graphs or just look at the cartoons, which speak 1,000 words. I served on a redevelopment agency in the city of Fullerton for 18 years, including chairman of that agency for 3 years, also as a county supervisor, now as a legislator, so I have a number of different perspectives. My first experience as a member of the Fullerton Redevelopment Agency was to be told how wonderful it was that we were getting a Costco at the price of a several $million subsidy. Unfortunately, within a year, that Costco sent us all a letter saying unless we gave them more subsidies, they were going to move across the street to Anaheim and take all of their sales tax with them. So my first experience with redevelopment was the predatory nature, how cities use this against each other, and how big box retailers, auto dealers, and others pit cities against cities. We had a number of auto dealers in my city of Fullerton that left the city because they were targeted by other redevelopment agencies, specifically in Buena Park, for subsidies and discounted land to simply take them and move them somewhere else. And I couldn't really blame Buena Park because they'd lost auto dealerships to La Mirada's redevelopment agency, who'd lost them to Cerritos, who created a raw land project out of Dairyland, declared it blighted, and said, hey, we've got the first auto mall in Southern California. Predatory redevelopment continues. San Jose is amassing land and public subsidies through its agency to try to lure away the Oakland A's. Santa Clara Redevelopment Agency has committed $45 million in public property taxes through its redevelopment agencies to lure away the San Francisco 49ers. None of this results in any net economic benefit, but simply shifting uses within the state, because redevelopment is primarily driven by cities' desire for sales tax revenue. It has nothing to do with high-quality jobs. It's about sales tax, because that 1% of the Bradley Burns that cities get is cities they can use for their general fund. So they'll be happy to sacrifice hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in redevelopment money to get some of that money back in their general fund through sales tax. And so I think when we look at reforming redevelopment, we have to look at some type of sales tax reform, whether to address per capita or to have some kind of sales tax pool, so cities are getting a reliable source of revenue. I think that cities ought to be able to shift their sales tax for more property tax, which over time changes much less, and which also gets them invested in housing as well. It's said that redevelopment agencies help housing, but the problem you have in local government with cities is that housing doesn't pay. If you have a housing developer, you're not going to get the property taxes back paid for the services, which is why they're all, a lot of the new ones are in guarded gate communities under Mello-Roos's, et cetera. Eminent domain is an important aspect of redevelopment agencies, and I think that's why a lot of agencies actually see negative growth, because a lot of small property owners sit back and hope the agency will buy them out and are told they can't develop their own properties because under threat of eminent domain it's going to be taken and given to an outside developer. When I was with the County of Orange, we actually had the Santa Ana Redevelopment Agency use eminent domain against a county health facility that declared it blighted because they wanted to transfer the property to a nearby auto dealer who was selling BMWs. So here we have Santa Ana Redevelopment Agency saying public health is blight, but we're going to help the economy by subsidizing the sale of fancier German cars. There are a lot of anecdotes about redevelopment. You've heard them today, but the research shows that the success simply isn't there. I'm happy to hear that the Sacramento Redevelopment Agency, I guess I'm happy to hear that it shut down 2 liquor stores, but lest we think they're on some kind of temperance crusade, we just saw the opening up of a Mermaid Bar downtown Sacramento, which came at a $5.7 million subsidy in property tax revenues. So I would say to my Republican colleagues, and I am a Republican, we always say don't raise taxes, cut waste, fraud, and abuse. This is a wasteful program. Certainly it's abused eminent domain. And if we're not going to cut here, then where are we going to cut? And to my Democratic colleagues, the governor has asked you to cut welfare for the poor, and we may have to do that. But if you're going to cut welfare for the poor, you ought to cut welfare for rich developers as well. And that's what he's asking you to do in his proposal, and I do support it.
Thank you, Assemblymember. There is a list of people. I apologize to the 5 of you. You got here on time, but there is a list. And since that was the rule, I may ask you to vacate. Jack, you're on the list. The first 4 people: Mike Hudson, Jack Batchelor, Julie Snyder, and Randy Hicks.
Senator Wolk,
yes.
If I could just say,
I know.
We unfortunately have another meeting that we have to go to. If this stuff isn't short and add to the discussion, we just need to leave. So please be mindful.
All right, so quickly. And then I would like, is there a microphone that we can use so people can line up? Mike Hudson, Jack Batchelor, Julie Snyder, Randy Hicks. Mike, quickly. Go ahead.
I'm Randy Hicks, California Disability Rights. Senator Walk, I'm very pleased to be here
today.
Tell
me who you are. You have to identify yourself.
I'm Mike Hudson, Vice Mayor of the City of Suisun. We right now have a pass-through agreement for $700,000 going to the Fairfield-Suisun Unified School District. One thing, a big point has been made that our redevelopment does not benefit school districts, and I disagree with that. As you'll recall, Suisun City was the worst in the Bay Area, period. We don't steal companies from other places to bring them to Suisun City. Suisun City is a little bit isolated there. We were bypassed by the interstate. We have a very unique town, but it used to be the worst. What we're doing with the dollars is making a policy statement. When we spend money, we make policy. And the policy we're making right now is obviously we have a state budget problem, and we need to pay that bill. But the policy statement we're making is that it's okay to take that money from an existing project, an existing program, regardless of whether there's abuse or not in that program. The treasurer had mentioned earlier that we should shut down things that have problems in it. And he said redevelopment's got all sorts of problems, so we need to shut that down, sand it down, start again. Well, under his system, we would be shutting down I-80 because of speeders, shutting down schools because of poor performance. Redevelopment has done great things for Suisun City, and you know it. We've been here. It did great things for Davis also. when you were on council there. This is a program, this is a policy statement. The policy statement is, where are you going to get the money for the state budget? I understand the desire, and maybe the reform is great, but shutting down something completely is not the right way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor Batchelor.
Thank you. The city of Dixon is a population of 17,000. We're in your district, and we appreciate your leadership that you provide us here in Sacramento. The Dixon Redevelopment Agency has $2.3 million in tax increments. We have a current bond debt of $350,000, and we have pass-throughs through to the county, our school district, and our library district of $717,000. Now, I don't have the exact dollar amounts for each of those agencies, but when I get back to Dixon, I will have that information
Thank you, Mayor.
to you immediately. I was particularly impressed with some of the earlier testimony in terms of what we need to do with redevelopment agencies, and that is to restructure them. And I look at restructuring like I would look at what makes Dixon, I think, a great city. We're an ag-based community. We have several hundred acres of almonds and walnuts, and I say almonds because I went to Chico State, and I spent many winter mornings running up and down almond rows, smudging when you could smudge in those days to protect the blooms on the trees. So we get our ag business people have these orchards, and they provide nutrients to sustain those trees. They go in and they prune those trees so that they produce good crops. I would use that analogy in what I would hope the legislature will do in terms of restructuring redevelopment agencies. Provide some good nutrient, surgically prune the organization so it continues to produce. Don't go in and turn off the nutrients, come in with chainsaws and cut everything down and sell the wood for firewood. So
good analogy.
My comments are, we need your help. We want to work together, and good governance demands that we work together. And one other comment, I want to respectfully disagree with earlier comments that said redevelopment agencies are not open and transparent. Local government, city councils, boards of supervisors and redevelopment agencies are probably, in my estimation, one of the more open and transparent forms of local governance. When we have meetings, last night I had a 3-hour meeting on medical marijuana dispensaries. I had over 200 people in my council chambers giving testimony. Now that's open and transparent.
It's all that ag land, Jack.
Yeah, and we do the same thing when we have our redevelopment agency meetings. So anyway,
thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I appreciate the time to be here today, and hopefully we can come to consensus and have an agency that continues to provide services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Ms. Snyder, remember there's another place to talk about housing entirely.
Absolutely.
30 seconds.
Madam Chair and members, Julie Snyder representing Housing California. Our nonprofit members build affordable places to live for low and moderate income Californians. And we would like the committee to know we are gravely concerned about the governor's proposal in its current form because it would eliminate the largest local or state source of public investment in affordable homes, which is more than $1 billion a year currently. Heeding what we've heard from you and the governor, we are developing an alternative proposal. We hope to have that ready to share with you soon. We hope you will seriously consider that. From our perspective, adequate shelter is one of the most fundamental of human needs. Rising rents and job losses in California continue to push more and more families into homelessness. The foreclosure crisis is also actually contributing to that by pushing more families into the rental market. So simply, the private market in California just doesn't build enough apartments with rents that Californians can afford. And this really points to the critical role of tax increment financing in providing choices that those families can afford. According to CRA, since 1993, tax increment financing has contributed, along with other public and private sources, to almost 98,000 affordable places to live. great. So in the State of the State, the governor said that we must focus on core functions of government. We urge you to consider that, or to stand up for the idea that a core function is preventing homelessness among low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Mr. Hicks, Mr. Ferroggiaro, hope I got that right, Mr. Lloyd Dashnia, and Mr. Lee, I cannot read the rest, from Vacaville, L-I or L-O-U. Mr. Hicks.
Californians with Disability Rights has taken a neutral position on this issue. The thing of it is, it sounds good that they want to take redevelopment money and put it back into the general fund, especially the part when it comes to Medi-Cal. Tomorrow, Mr. DeSania is going to have a hearing on this, on Medi-Cal, and how bad the cuts are going to be. But we are also concerned that it will take away the right to have affordable housing. And what's going to happen, that they're going to conjoin them in together and take from one program to fund another program. And that's a big concern in the disability community. As we go along, we're going to look at this proposal, and I'm going to take the information I have, and I'm going to go back out to the public. Now, the public really want to know about what's happening here. I've gotten more calls on this now from Older Women's League and other senior organizations who have been greatly affected by this. We thank you for bringing up the proposal, and we thank you for this hearing. And as we go forward, we'll probably contact all of you again, and maybe we'll have you guys come out and give us a demonstration how this really affects everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Mr. Ferroggiaro.
Yes, ma'am.
Welcome. Mr. Dasho. Go on.
My name is Rod Ferroggiaro, and I live in Fairfield, and I'm against the governor's proposal to take away this redevelopment money. The way I understand it, the redevelopment program has been in existence since 1945, and I think it's part of the California Constitution. Mm-hmm. So I don't see, first off, just by the wave of a wand, how this thing goes away. I also want to say that I'm a simple person, so I'm a retired non-commissioned officer, and I first moved into Solano County in the 1970s, early 1970s. At that time, Fairfield, Sassoon had nothing to offer people to live there. One of the first monies that was spent on this redevelopment program in Solano County was building the Solano County Mall. And that's still one of the jewels of our county. And I hear a lot of people, a lot of titles, and I didn't bring my dog and pony show, so I don't have a whole lot of statistics and graphs and stuff to say. But as a common citizen living in the county, paying my taxes, a lot of the reasons why I want to live in Fairfield, I want to stay in Solano County, is because of programs that this redevelopment program has put in. The Sassoon City redevelopment waterfront, it was a blight area. No one could live there with any safety. Fairfield itself, Vacaville, all these cities have benefited a lot from the people and from the money, and that's why the people live there. That's why we pay taxes. We pay high taxes, and that's why the schools get the money to start with. So thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Mr.
Dashner.
Dashner, welcome.
Yes, my name is Lloyd Dashner. I'm a resident of Sassoon. I moved there in 1983. Solano County, I moved there in 1972. I'm also against this governor's program. When I moved to Sassoon, you couldn't take your family downtown in Sassoon. There was 7 bars, an oil company that just drove you out of there because it smelled so bad. The redistribution that they've done in downtown Sassoon is amazing. I don't know if you've been there, but I just want to say I'm totally against the governor's program. Thank you.
Lee from Vacaville. I have Brian Augusta, James Nakamura, Jan Vick. Please come forward. Catherine Slater-Carter, Mark Christian, Catherine Moy.
Am I next, Madam Chair? Brian Augusta.
Sir, your name?
James Nakamura.
Oh, okay, good. All right, you start.
Thank you. I'm Brian Augusta on behalf of the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation and also my colleagues at Western Center on Law and Poverty. I won't repeat what my colleague from Housing California said about the importance of the $1 billion in funding that we receive currently from redevelopment. I want to add, however, to the conversation a couple things which have not yet been raised regarding the housing needs of low-income folks that are implicated in this proposal. The first is what will become of the existing protections that we have in redevelopment law if redevelopment agencies go away and are replaced either by what's in the governor's proposal or by what has now been added to the conversation by the chair in using infrastructure financing districts. We have a number of protections that ensure that low-income people are not displaced, replacement housing obligations, housing production obligations, which are not currently a part of either of those proposals. We hope to add those to the conversation, both in your bill and the governor's proposal, because we think those are critical to offsetting the gentrifying effects of redevelopment. We also want to raise an issue about existing unmet obligations that redevelopment agencies currently have to produce housing and to replace housing that has been destroyed by their redevelopment activities. The funding for that it's not clear to us that the funding for that, for carrying out those activities, is part of the funding stream that's being assumed will go to successor agencies. And clearly, some of that money would have come from the 20% set aside. It's not clear that's part of the assumption of how much we'll need to continue to flow to successor agencies. And then there's a number of questions about outstanding debt and the amount that we're assuming is going to be available to pay down that outstanding debt. There's about $17 billion that is owed to the Low and Mod Fund. It's not clear how much, if any of that is assumed within the $29 billion assumption that we have all gleaned from reports to the controller. So those questions have not yet been raised, and we hope that those will become part of the conversation about the future of redevelopment agencies so that we can ensure that the low-income housing needs of folks are met both in carrying out those existing activities and in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Nakamura.
Yes, my name is James Nakamura. I'm the owner of a small business in Vacaville, and some friends asked me to come over here and speak about redevelopment or whatever, but to be honest with you, I really don't know that much about it. I look at this, I'm going, anything that takes away my rights to own my property, I'm pretty much against. There's just two things I have to say. One is, as a small business owner, right now, myself, I'm not making any money. I'm just making the business survive long enough so my employees can have a job. So there is no more money. So when the tax rates in June come up again, I'm going to be voting no. And I think most of the people that own businesses are going to say the same thing. So my big question here is that I think everybody knows where the pot of money is, where this is going to have to be balanced from. And it's going to be the state employees and their union. So I'm waiting to see what can happen there.
Okay,
I don't think there's anything else that we can do as a public.
Okay, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate that. Jan Vick is gone, I believe. Catherine Slater Carter?
Yes.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Slater Carter, and I am the president of the Montero Water and Sanitary District, a very special little district, but I'm here speaking as an individual. I am very thankful to Senator Wolk and Assemblyman Norby's comments. I want to put a personal cast on this conversation with my own personal experience. About 10 years ago or so, my husband and I bought a property in the city of Fairfield. We kept it had a restaurant that had been closed. As we attempted to market it, we would get potential clients coming in, and we'd send them to the city, where they were then taken over to redevelopment areas in which they would then settle. Through various predatory administrative artifices, we were prevented from developing our property for 10 years or more. We were lucky we could hold on to it. In fact, finally, the road project was finished, and the city filed court papers that said they were going to be taking a portion of our property by eminent domain. We got into mediation, at which point they announced, oh no, they were going to take the entire thing. they didn't bother changing their court filings. They simply heavily handed did that. As it turned out, the punchline to all of this is that the city had no tax dollars from my development of the property, and now they're selling it for less than they paid me for it. Not all stories are success stories, and I would urge the committee and the legislature to look very closely and change this law. I support the governor's proposal wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Mark Christian, Catherine Moy is here, Karen Klinger, Jean Heinel, Steve Hardy, Mayor Hardy, Laura Kuhn, Laura Fries, Bill Marble, Gretchen Lepau, and Ron Loveridge, and that's the end of the hearing. Mark, are you here? No. Catherine, you are. Welcome, Councilwoman.
Hello, Senator. My name is Catherine Moy. I'm a councilwoman from Fairfield, California. I'm, as one of the treasurers said, I'm a vampirus, I guess. I'm going to have to use that when I run again for City Council. I wanted to tell you that our pass-through for schools for the next fiscal year is $6.2 million. I don't know what it is for the other special districts, but I do want to talk specifically to the issue of schools. And I want to remind all of us here, because we're all public servants, that this is not the state's money, it's not the city's money, it's the people's money. And so we must be responsible with that. And I feel like we are in the city of Fairfield doing that. I'm going to Senator Wolk, be sending you a list of things that our city has done. I'm not going to bore you with all that. But I met on Monday of this week with a subcommittee of our Fairfield-Suisun School District, and we spoke about redevelopment. And they're scared of it going away, and let me tell you why. We've done a few things, quite a few things, and continue to help the schools besides the pass-through. We actually built a school. We moved a school. We spend $600,000 to $700,000 every year in police protection inside the schools, paid through with redevelopment money. After the horrible homicide of Matt Garcia, our late councilman, we put together at what is a PAL Center, an after-school program, and we serve there every day 100 at-risk youth. That's paid for redevelopment. We also feed some of those children who, by the way, that is their only meal a day. We do this through redevelopment. There are 600 on the list of at-risk children there. What we also did was tear down an entire neighborhood across from a school.
You to sum up.
Oh, okay. I'm going to sum up right now. We tore down an entire neighborhood, and the school administrator said, you know, this is the best thing you could have done for the safety of our children. We no longer see people selling crack on the corners. So I stand in opposition. Our city does stand in opposition to the governor's proposal. I thank you today to be able to speak.
And thank you. Mm-hmm. All right, Karen Klinger, welcome.
Thank you. Karen Klinger, small business owner, real estate broker agent for a little more than 40 years. I see redevelopment agencies as just the opposite of who I am. I am free enterprise. They are subsidized government for big government and corporate welfare. I also believe that the question that we need to ask is, are RDAs and their powers constitutional? They create false economies. As I said, this is my fourth down cycle. They profit when values are high. They profit when values are low. That's when they create their project areas. There would be affordable housing if affordable housing homes and units were not threatened and taken by eminent domain. The people have you, the legislature, at the local level, at our city councils and board of supervisors. I'm not sure that we are totally represented. It appears as though that there's a huge difference of what you understand and what we receive and the information that we're able to obtain. So there's the legislature and 3 lobbying groups that absolutely, whenever a proposition comes up that defends the people, like Proposition 98, eminent domain, they were able to get their 99 passed. They have more money. So you have League of California Cities, CSAC, which is for the counties, California Redevelopment Association. These are huge lobbying groups that take public funds to work against us. Proposition 22 was another one of those. And I believe the people are so confused, government has become so complex that they don't know what to believe and they don't know how to vote. That makes it very difficult for those who know and follow what's going on. There has been little to no oversight over redevelopment agencies, and I have a concern about that also being with successor agencies. RDAs and their project areas.
I'm going to ask you to sum up, my dear.
RDAs and their project, thank you. RDAs and their project areas are rarely shut down. All of the agencies and project areas in Sacramento have not been shut down. They still have debt. One thing I wanted to mention also is that I do support the abolition of all 425 RDAs, and the raid has been from them taking public funds. I also, one last question I want to make sure that you're aware of is that the over $93 billion redevelopment debt does not include the cities and counties economic development debt. Thank you.
Okay. Jean Heinel, welcome.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm with Californians United for Redevelopment Education, and I have been affected by redevelopment in 3 cities and twice in Southgate, where my primary residence, and I have 4 acres in Riverside, and our 10 units in downtown Long Beach was eminent domain, or we sold under the threat of eminent domain in 2004. A few people in Riverside did do a lawsuit to stop or invalidate the plan, and what we found was the plan originally was 8,000 acres. We whittled it down some with our lawsuit, but they included 1,000 brand new homes, which really increased their tax increment tremendously. But we did garage sales to raise money, and we helped educate a few people in how redevelopment works. But the citizens didn't have the time or the money to continue with the lawsuits. We did do a settlement with the city, and hello, Mayor Leverage. And then in the Southgate in 1991, our commercial quarters was in a proposed redevelopment project area. But the project area committee, which I was a member, voted it out, and luckily a council person did the resolution to undo it. But in 2009, they came back and eliminated eminent domain. I have a written statement, and I have statements from Mr. Leaf in San Diego and Sherry Curtis from the Motherlode Tea Party I'd like to submit.
Give those to the sergeant, and thank you very much for coming. Mayor Hardy, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having the hearing, Senator and gentlemen. We're opposed to the proposition as it has been presented. As a matter of fact, your district office is in a redevelopment zone. Otherwise, there would have been just bars and empty buildings down there on Davis Street. So I have our city manager, Laura Kuhn, who will say just a few words, and then we'll be out of here. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor, for the work you do.
Thank you again for the hearing. My name is Laura Kuhn. I'm the city manager of the city of Vacaville, and thank you for the hearing. It's nice to be here. I'll say one thing that hopefully will send one message, and that is I am a city manager, and I am not necessarily in a position to say that we should abolish all things that we see are bad. I think there are going to be stories on both sides of redevelopment that you will see were situations that were bad, and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I think we need to look at the benefits of redevelopment and make sure that we are positioning California to be healthy in the future. John Shirey said we need to look at the big picture and look at what we are getting rid of and making sure that we're not losing our competitive edge. We are living in a capitalistic world. Business is only going to go where they see they get the best deal, and a very good example of what redevelopment can do to generate new jobs is the world's largest biotechnological manufacturing facility in Vacaville. That was not possible without redevelopment funds. It's generated over 1,000 jobs, high-paying jobs that would not have existed in California. We would have lost that project either to another state or to another country. And that's what we do see happening. So redevelopment made that project feasible. That's one very good example.
That's Genentech?
Yes, yes.
Bad example.
Gross tax increment in Vacaville is about
They
almost...
took our single sales factor and left, and they cited their facility in Oregon.
We have
Not
another
good.
example.
What you did was good.
We tried.
And
we
then they
tried
went
working
somewhere
very hard.
else.
We still have good jobs in Vacaville.
We're going to fix that too.
Okay. Gross tax increment for Vacaville is about $35 million. Over half of that gross tax increment goes back to either the 20% set aside for affordable housing, which is almost $7 million, and statutory pass-throughs to school districts in the county.
How much do you divert from the schools?
I'd say of the, I don't have the exact number, and we will get that for you. We do make the county whole in our I-80, 505 redevelopment area. So in the case of the county and that particular redevelopment agency, this proposal would actually not generate any more revenue for the county. I'll double check on the school districts and get you specific dollars.
Thank you, Laura.
Other examples of great projects that bring jobs and help our community, as our mayor said, our downtown Vacaville. Our city has focused a lot of our agency funds on infrastructure to facilitate development that benefits the community and brings jobs. Kaiser Hospital, it's a very good example.
Absolutely.
Would not
To sum
exist.
up.
Right. And I'll stop there. Just say lots of great examples. Thanks for the hearing, but I think we need to look closely at what we're doing.
Thank you. Councilmember Freeze, still here. Welcome from San Juan Capistrano.
Thank you very much. I'm Laura Freeze, City Council, San Juan Capistrano. I like following the other Laura because I agree with her. In San Juan Capistrano, we are a very old city. Some of our streets are the same streets that Father Serra walked on in 1776, and our layout is based on the mission culture of the 18th century. Without redevelopment agency funds, we'd probably still look more like a ghost town of that era rather than the city that we look like today. In the last few years, we've had 27 projects that the redevelopment agency has helped with. Many of these have to do with public benefits and blight, including things like the agency purchased the rat-infested 100-year-old railroad depot in the heart of our downtown. And after seismic retrofitting, asbestos removal, and other improvements, we were able to sell it. And it's now an active train depot today and restaurant. Similarly, RDA funds were used to enhance the Metrolink platform. It's now through the funds. It is we now have a nice platform, brick facade, public restrooms, and a landscaped passenger area. None of that was there before. Our historical Los Rios district, which is the oldest still used residential street in the state, the RDA was able to acquire 4 properties, which allowed us to provide public parking, restrooms, improve circulation, and all while protecting our cultural assets. We use redevelopment money wisely. We've also, through our infrastructure, economic development, and everything else, we brought in over 1,500 jobs to San Juan Capistrano and 126 affordable housing units.
I'll ask you to sum up.
Okay. All of this was done through redevelopment agency funds. I think that to lose the redevelopment funds and the housing mandate too, we may as well, we probably won't need the schools so much because people will be moving to other states. I don't believe in alternative tools or the phasing out of the elimination. I just hope that you'll look at it very carefully, restrict it, but continue it. Thank you very much.
And will you send me as well?
I sure will.
Good. The amount of diversion from cities, counties, special districts. Next is Mayor Marble. Welcome.
Not mayor, but council member from Woodland, and also president of the Sacramento Valley Division of the League of California Cities, which is 58 cities from Galt north to the Oregon border, the majority of which are small cities. And I don't want to add any anecdotes to the issue of what's been done in our city and others, but I would like to speak to a couple of issues that I think are appropriate. First of all, of our 58 cities, 35 are small cities and readily fit the definition that's on the first page of the LAO policy brief, which says that in the past, project areas typically were small, usually 10 to 100 acres. These 35 cities fit that bill in their current redevelopment projects, and that should not be overlooked. And I hope that this committee will not adopt a one-size-fits-all solution to this problem, as the governor's proposal is a one-size-fits-all. I understand that this is much more complex than a one-size-fits-all, and I hope you will too. Please don't rush to judgment. This is a huge issue. There are huge issues associated with disruption, whether it's in private enterprise or whether it's in government, and I hope that you won't rush that. Also, Mr. Lockyer himself said, quote, what is the taxonomy of priorities? I think that's a very valid question. However, I disagree with his conclusion that we should blow it up. That's also a direct quote. We should blow it up and start all over. And I don't agree that that is necessarily the correct solution. Madam Chair, as you are well aware, in the Delta issues that you've been so much associated with, it is important for the appropriate entities to be at the table, and I hope that in whatever way you proceed, you will keep cities at the table and keep our input at the table, because we are the government that is closest to the people, and this affects cities in a great way. And last of all, my last comment, I'm a dentist by profession. Medicine and dentistry over the last 30 years have undergone a huge, monumental change. It's called evidence-based medicine, evidence-based dentistry. We need evidence-based government, and there are anecdotes on both sides of the equation, but I am not seeing evidence backing many of the statements that have been made by the LAO in their brochure here. And I would just call your attention to page 7, the very last sentence on page 7, which says, in our view, and goes on to make statements, but they have just in the preceding sentence refuted CRA's contention, but they are not giving any evidence for their own contention, and I think we need evidence in this scientific evidence. Thank you.
Mayor Marble, thank you for your comments. I would ask you to encourage through the league that the league step up to the table and engage. I think that's smart in light of the Delta and many other issues.
Thank you.
Mayor Loveridge, welcome. Are you still mayor?
It's still mayor.
Are you mayor for life? What is this?
Thank you for not closing off comments by noon. Let me just be very brief and raise a couple of themes. I commend to you an article by David Brooks in the New York Times. Yesterday it began a triumph of cities, and he was contrasting Ron Emanuel's experience in D.C. with that in Chicago, saying the abstractions, the national abstractions, were different than the street realities of Chicago. I would suggest, as you review the LAO, one, and this is really an academic comment, is that you can have systematic case studies, and I think it is very lacking in this document and what we have heard. Opposed to anecdotal stuff, you can't have systematic case studies. Several just very, very brief points. First is the one that Mark made, is that this last year I've been president of the National League of Cities, so you spend a lot of time going around the country. states are providing all kinds of tools for cities to compete, not with each other, but to compete with the states in this global marketplace. And so the question of tools is not an incidental one. Next is this idea that what is a core service, and I think it's interesting. But if you look at the literature now, that there's emerging consensus that the core service city is economic success, economic prosperity, economic development, economic growth. That is a core service, maybe the first of the services the cities need to pay attention to. If you take that away, I was haunted by reading the LAO statement, economic development could continue at the local level. That is not a very positive call. You've gone through what is called out as a replacement. I don't understand it. For us, it doesn't work, doesn't translate into economic development. And just final point, it seems to me to close down redevelopment at a time where the state has 12% unemployment, where we're competing for jobs, makes no sense. It's our primary tool the cities have. You almost have no other.
Thank you. Gretchen Lipow? I apologize for skipping over you. That was just
I'm Gretchen Lipow. I'm a retired teacher from Alameda. Last year, the citizens in Alameda were bombarded by a redevelopment company, SunCal, and their financial backer, D.E. Shaw, a very wealthy hedge fund operator. They took the plan to ballot, a takeover plan that would have literally given away the entire Navy base, severing all connections to the city political structure, but not before utilizing redevelopment bonds. They could have well afforded to redevelop this themselves, and their figure was $700 million. This multi-billion-dollar hedge fund was not about to drop their own money. Why should they? They could get redevelopment bonds. 85% of the Alameda citizens saw through this and rejected their plans. They've now come back and sued the city for $100 million. They have sued the city manager, and they have sued the city attorney. Right now, we are in the midst of a campaign for a parcel tax, and right in the middle of this campaign, the city council gets together and they voted to extend 235 million more bonds with a majority. All they need is a simple majority, and we're out there breaking our necks because we need 2/3 of a vote. We lost a parcel tax last year. I'm not so sure this one's going to pass. I want to point out in my city of Alameda, which is about 72,000 people, teachers have lost 8 work days this year. Students have lost 5 instructional days. They are down to the state minimum. If redevelopment was working so well, why are we in this position that they passed through in Alameda about $700,000 to the schools, but it wasn't enough? And I want to point out that California is 43rd in the nation of per pupil spending, and I picked up that figure from Education Weekly last week. So I just want to say I support heartily redevelopment reform. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I have more folks on the list. Stephen Rhodes. I have, first of all, a council member who came from the city of Fullerton. Council member, are you still here? Come on down. Here. And I have a citizen, Chuck Kingetter. Are you still here? Come on. And then we have others who are representing, who get paid to be here. So, welcome.
Yes, hi. Thank you for the privilege of addressing you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. I am a council member, City of Fullerton, therefore a member of the city's redevelopment agency as well. We're a city of a little over 22 square miles, of which more than a quarter is officially deemed blighted. Our earliest project areas began some 40 years ago, and not only are we not diminishing in blighting area, we're adding on. We did a 50% increase 2 years ago. One thing that I did was follow with interest the public input at the Assembly Committee on Monday, and a proponent of redevelopment who opposed the governor's plan utilized the study, which has been cited frequently, 1998 PPIC study, read several lines directly from the book, but he stopped short in a key area. He talked about benefits provided by redevelopment. The very next sentence where he dropped off, he cited page 62, says, however, the true effect of redevelopment on assessed value is, now in italics, is only that growth over and above the growth in the matched area, unquote. So the question of redevelopment is not whether RDAs can fund developments which are showy, new, and pleasing. That is not the question. Billions of dollars in diverted property taxes can accomplish that. The important question is whether this activity even pays for itself, let alone provides an overall economic benefit. This study convincingly concluded that it does not. California has indulged in tax increment financing to a greater degree than any other state. If redevelopment was as effective as its proponents claim, our state would be leading, not lagging, the nation in the economic recovery. I believe that's the only proof that we need for you to go forward. I am supportive of the governor's proposal.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for coming from Fullerton.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Did I pronounce your name wrong, right? Kingater?
Yes, you did.
Oh, good. Welcome.
Honorable Chair and committee members, this is really exhausting, especially for a citizen. Understanding the redevelopment laws and how it all works together is really exhausting. But I want to agree with the League of Cities. I believe that there are many success stories, economic growth. It is a land use. Planning Commission, redevelopment don't normally go hand in hand. In my city, I'm from Sassoon. Don't go hand in hand. We went from the 70s through the 80s, then on to the 90s, and now we're in 2010. I think redevelopment has done a great job of fixing our crumbling infrastructure and also taking care of blighted areas as well as low-income housing. It's done wonders for Sassoon. But I also have to agree with Mr. Cohen. His proposal asks some really hard questions, and I would like some things explained in greater detail, and I'd like to see some things codified. I think the League of Cities and myself are in great agreement and great common ground in the transparency issue. It really has to be more transparent. The other issue that I'm really concerned about is in Sassoon, we're 98 or 99% redevelopment. So the City Council has control of all our funding, and it's really hard to get or have any say in what's happening. I'd like to see some kind of codification. If it doesn't go away, what percentage of a city can be measured land use-wise for redevelopment? The whole city is not blighted, and I think everybody knows this. And I think if you could ask Mr. Cohen to find a way to codify it or at least stress the issue, I am for the proposal. And if there's some kind of common ground or something we can work out, I think this is something that really needs to be addressed. How large what's the land use? Can it be all of the city, have 50%? I mean, I'd like to see 10 or 15. But though that is my real issue. And then the other issue that I'm still trying to grapple with is once it goes away, what's going to happen to the freezing of the property tax, that frozen base? Because currently we have to pay the current redevelopment for redeveloping our waterfront. Part of that money has to go there, and I'm really confused, and it hasn't been explained to me pretty well of how that money gets reallocated or what we can do with it. So if they can put explanations in Mr. Cohen's proposal, or maybe this council, or I'm sorry, this committee could put forth some of these formulas and how it all works, because to the average citizen it's extremely confusing. I want to thank you for this hearing, and I want to thank you for your hard work.
Okay, thank you for coming. I have Stephen Rhodes, Jose Trujillo. Stephen,
I'm Steve.
You've been very patient.
Well,
You're on. And then Jose Trujillo,
and
Jeremy Smith, Rob Weiner, and Richard Lyon. And then
I represent Santa Ana, and
go ahead.
And we are in support of the governor's Santa Ana School District, and we are supportive of the governor's proposal. And we appreciate your emphasis on education. And I'd like to just elaborate a tiny bit, if I can, on that area. The treasurer mentioned the word free, and part of that was not just a pass-through, but part of that is because of the large amount of property tax that goes to schools that basically is a free good, I think, to the redevelopment agencies, because you in Sacramento pay it in an increased school apportionments. And that's, your analysis gives a number on that of about $3.2 billion. that would mean that you got $3.2 billion of your $90 billion budget that you've got to allocate for this purpose.
That's right.
You might want to allocate some of that to education. You might have wanted to allocate some of it to reapportionment. You might want to allocate some of it to other programs. But one of the best things about the governor's proposal is it's highlighting that and making us take a look at it. So we are very much in support of the governor's proposal, and we're very, very much in support of using some of the money in 2012-13 for education. This year, we are basically frozen, the same amount of level as last year, plus a deferral of about 1.7. Last year, the budget year, we will be frozen again, even if the tax measures pass, at the same level of spending, with another $2 billion in deferral. The governor pointed out in his when he gave his budget overview that since 2007-8, that education has been cut by 13%. And we regard the governor's proposal, especially for education in 2012-13, as is essential and as a breath of fresh air. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Trujillo, welcome.
Thank you, ma'am. My name is Jose Trujillo. I'm the president of ASME Local 164, and I'm also a construction specialist. We are disheartened to hear that the governor is painting his proposal as a choice between redevelopment and the less fortunate citizens of the state, or between redevelopment and fire or police or schools. This is simply not true. The funding provided to redevelopment is used to support every one of these activities. I'm going to summarize this because I know we all have to go. I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention to the results of the governor's study that shows that the RDAs are nearly double the asset value of properties, 188% higher than non-RDA areas. When you take into consideration to other economic benefits illustrated by subsequent reports, it is also true that there's a lot of benefits. The evidence also shows that the RDAs have a significant positive effect on the state of California. Now, in addition to the questions that you have provided, I want to ask the committee staff and the governor's office, if you look at the LAO's report on page 10, figure 6, the governor estimates that the current tax increment is $5.2 billion. Of that amount, 20%, or $1 billion, is currently required to be set aside for low-income housing. From which source will the $1 billion in funding for low-income housing will come? It doesn't show that. So if the legislature is prepared to defy the will of the voters by ignoring Proposition 22, and if the legislature can justify doing that, why are you not making similar efforts to get around Proposition 98 or roll back Proposition 13? We have some ideas. We need to redefine blight. We need to focus redevelopment agencies on job creations and using affordable housing resources, increasing the pass-through of property taxes to schools, lengthening the term of project areas, and committing the additional funding to state which could be used to bond for immediate resources, especially now when a recovery is so important and unemployment is staggering high and the state is lagging nationally. Don't kill the agencies that are creating hundreds of thousands of jobs each year, lifting the most unfortunate citizens of our community. That's our job. And generating billions of dollars in tax revenue to the state to provide other vital services. Let's mend it. Let's not end it.
I ask you to sum up, Mr.
Thank you. Ask me, we stand together with all of you and everybody else here, and we're ready to work with all of you to find such a solution. And I hope we can do that soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith? No.
That's me, but this gentleman was there before me.
All right. Go ahead.
Hi. My name is Philip Sharamatero. I'm from Martinez, California.
I represent an organization called Citizens Against the Martinez Redevelopment Agency, and for the last 50-some-odd years, this organization and others before us have stopped the establishment of a redevelopment agency in Martinez, and we will continue to do so. So we would hope that in this big decision you're making about redevelopment agencies, please make clear that no other redevelopment agencies will be established. That would help Martinez a lot. We've been fighting over this for a number of years. I know Mr. Desaulnier is familiar with this, and it's created havoc in our community. I think it was stated earlier that the state and local relationship isn't very solid. It's very poor. You need to get to the individual person. If you're going to have a redevelopment agency in some way, shape, or form, make eminent domain voluntary. And if you're going to dislocate somebody, make sure they get a premium for what they're getting. This is unfair to deal with people at this level. Redevelopment agencies, in the view of the Castle Coalition, which is a part of the Institute for Justice out of Washington, D.C., gives redevelopment agencies in California an F. An F.
Thank you.
I'm not quite done. Just one more thing. I think what the governor is trying to do is dismantle big government, and RDA is big government. We don't need that here. Thank you.
That might need to be fixed eventually. All right.
Mr. Smith. Thank you, Senator, members of the committee who are still here. I guess if I know what he was going to say, I would have gone before him, but that's okay. I'm here in support of the RDAs. And as, first of all, Jeremy Smith on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council.
Goodness gracious. Okay. We'll fix it before the next hearing.
I'm here, as I said, in support of RDAs generally. Of course, we agree with comments made by Mr. Shirey and folks from the League of Cities that they are not perfect. We agree with that. We stand ready to sit at the table and work on solutions to make them work better and make everybody happier about them, but we don't believe their abolition is the way to go. One thing that I have not heard today, and I know that it's not lost on Senator Desaulnier or Senator Wilk or any of the other senators who are here, is that the redevelopment funds and the redevelopment agencies lead to jobs. We can debate about the number of construction jobs that they create, but whether it's a mermaid bar or whether it's tearing down an old building that needs to come down, there are workers working. And we hope that they're union workers, but even if they aren't unionized construction workers, they're workers, and they're making a salary, and they're making a living, and hopefully getting health care and staying out of the emergency room because they have health care then. So I don't want that to be lost on the committee. I don't believe that it's lost on Senator Wilk or Senator Desaulnier or anybody else who was here. But it wasn't said today. I just wanted to make sure it was said that those are construction jobs. And one more point.
Quickly.
I would, with respect, I feel bad that Mr. Norby left, but with respect, I would say that the money that RDAs provide go to locally owned businesses. I'm not going to sit here and defend the developers of the state of California, but the contractors that actually do the work are locally owned businesses that employ local workers, whether they be union or non-union. And that if this committee, I know, Senator Wilk, you've done a lot of work over the last couple of years on corporate tax breaks, tax credits that go out every year. Yep. And there's money there. Unfortunately, it's not easy money, and that's, I think, what you meant when you said there's no more money. There's probably no more easy money because that would require 2/3 vote. But those are the kind of that's the kind of corporate welfare we should be concerned about, not RDA money. That's not corporate welfare. That's money that goes to locally owned businesses for the most part to employ local workers on jobs. So I wanted to make sure that everybody realized that we shouldn't call that corporate welfare. So we're here for the construction workers. We think that the RDAs do a good job of employing local workers, and we stand ready to work with the governor and this committee to figure out a way around his original proposal. Thanks.
You know, I generally don't interfere with public comment, but I really can't help myself after this morning. When you make your analysis of jobs, I'm willing to concede that there are jobs created and that construction jobs, whether union or non-union, result and in projects that are a benefit, many of them to the community. But my argument has been all morning that that's only part of the discussion, that at the same time that's going on, that there is a decision being made because there is less money going to the counties because of the diversion of property tax, and there is less money, actually not less money, but less money going to special districts and to the city councils themselves, to their general funds. Those result in folks losing their jobs as well, especially in this era. So I guess what I'm asking everyone to do, and would hope that would come out of this hearing, is a recognition that the problem is just not, it's not just tunnel vision here. It's not just one agency that acts in some kind of vacuum, that it has effects and consequences because it's the same people and the same population and the same tax dollar. So sorry you were at the end and I'm tired, but thank you.
No, it's okay.
Mr. Lyon, you wrap up.
Thanks. Yeah.
No.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Let's talk about flood protection.
On behalf of the California Building Industry Association, I'm the last man standing, so I'll second.
Oh, for heaven's sake! No, this is it. Come forward. That's it. Really, it's 1:15.
We are very concerned about the governor's proposal. I just make these observations. We build where the market allows, where the economics make it feasible, and where the local planning palette has been set to indicate that the locality is open for business. And in those older urban legacy areas, the so-called infill areas, that are particularly challenging, redevelopment offers the framework to bring all of those things together, whether it's assembling land, cleaning up the land, providing the upfront financing to improve the infrastructure, providing for the subsidy for affordable housing in those high-cost markets, navigating all the different multi-agencies, upzoning. The redevelopment framework offers that opportunity, and we've established a law in this state, SB 375, that looks to bring together transportation, land use, housing in a way that provides a pathway to achieve our climate change goals. And certainly redevelopment is an important tool. It's hard to imagine that if redevelopment agencies went away, that we would be able to achieve our SB 375 goals. So again, we're concerned about the governor's proposal. We're always prepared to sit down and talk about restructuring and different ways to look at achieving a good outcome. And a good outcome for us would be to make sure that redevelopment agencies are there and they're able to operate on a going forward basis.
Okay, thank you. And batting cleanup?
I will be the last speaker. I promise it'll be short, but I would be neglecting my duties, so I didn't come talk a little about affordable housing. California Housing Consortium builds housing throughout the state for low-income families here in California. Redevelopment agencies remain the principal source of those monies. They are a critical component in what we do in providing communities that work for citizens. We talk a lot about jobs and schools. It starts with a shelter, and we remain committed to working with you. We've met with committee staff. We're going to continue to work, but right now, RDA is a critical component in our success, and we want to make sure that as we move forward, we're allowed to continue to provide that affordable housing, because without that, the rest of the discussions seem to fall off the wayside. So thank you.
Okay, and thank you, and that will be the last comment for today. Senator DeSaulnier, if there's anything you wish to add?
Nice job.
Same to you. All right, this committee is adjourned.